that they're facing, where developers come armed with substantial funds and resources to contest their applications. Locally at Warwick District Council, we had an application just last week where the planning committee were essentially advised to allow it because of the fear of having to contest it and not having the financial resources to do so. I have written to the Secretary of State about this issue. Is that something that we should be extremely concerned about nationally?
Well, each planning authority has a quasi-judicial role, Mr. Speaker, to adjudge a planning application against national and local plans, and I have every confidence that planning committees up and down the country do that. If the honourable gentleman wishes to refer to cuts in local government as a 7.5% increase in cash terms for this financial year, that's a very eccentric definition of the term cut, even by somebody from the Labour Party.
Dame Priti Patel.
Ministers are aware that Malden District Council was allocated £5 million of levelling up funding. I, along with the Right Honourable Member for Malden and our council, have been informed that that must be spent on cultural projects, despite the fact that we have a local crisis, which is the closure of St Peter's Hospital, and we want that money to be spent to level up health and well-being, which is one of the 5 principles of levelling up. So can ministers urgently review all our representations so that we can actually work at pace now to sort this terrible issue out locally and level up our health situation?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend makes a powerful point, and I know from a previous life and at a previous time St Peter's Hospital pretty well. My honourable friend, the member for Redcar, has just signalled to me that he's aware of the issue to which my right honourable friend refers, has sympathy with it, and will be happy to meet with her in pretty quick time in order to discuss further details.
Shadow Minister Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Working people are paying the price of the cost of living crisis. But isn't it the truth that the Liz Truss mini-budget didn't occur in a vacuum? There is a pattern of the Tories shifting the tax burden onto hard-pressed households. Council tax bills have rocketed by almost £500 since the Tories came to power. And on top of this, Conservative councils will charge residents almost £280 more than their Labour counterparts. So as voters go to the polls on the 2nd of May, is the Minister hoping that they will somehow forget the council tax bombshell facing them, or is he expecting that more candidates will follow the lead of their West Midlands campaign and ditch the toxic Tory brand completely?
Well, the honourable gentleman wins first prize for the brass neck of the afternoon competition. Let me just remind him very gently and politely about the situation in Birmingham.
Yes.
I think it is well known by residents up and down the land that Conservative-led councils are more efficient, deliver greater improvement at pace, and are far more focused on delivering for their residents. That is a proud record that colleagues and I will take to the voters during this local election campaign, and it is one I have every confidence we will triumph in.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our decision-making criteria for the Community Ownership Fund can be found in the published explanatory note on gov.uk. Round 4, Window 1 has now closed and will be assessed according to that criteria. Round 4, Window 2 will open in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was delighted to hear that so many projects have received a large amount of money to take over community centres, heritage buildings, pubs, sporting facilities, and the list includes green spaces. Could the Minister confirm that if a community group wanted to buy part of a chalk stream which is for sale for the benefit of that community, that would be in the scope of the Community Ownership Fund?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd be happy to meet with her to discuss this. We've funded similar land purchases, but it will be dependent on the factors locally. But as I say, I'd be happy to meet with her and discuss.
Question 11, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will take questions 11 and 13 together. The Government is committed to ending rough sleeping. We published our cross-government strategy, Ending Rough Sleeping for Good, in September 2022, and we are investing an unprecedented £2.4 billion to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping over 3 years. Rough sleeping levels are 18% lower in 2023 compared to the peak in 2017 and 9% below pre-pandemic levels. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government and this department
has presided over a litany of failures. The party opposite has pledged to end rough sleeping by the end of this Parliament. And I have to disagree with the Honourable Lady, because rough sleeping numbers are yet again on the up. And instead of fulfilling their manifesto commitment, the government has prioritised criminalising the homeless rather than ending it. And even many on their own backbenches cannot support this. So when will this department's leadership grow a backbone and tell their colleagues in the Home Office shelve the pernicious plans that exist within the Criminal Justice Bill?
This government is absolutely committed to ending rough sleeping. That's why we're investing £2.4 billion. Of that, £1.2 billion, very importantly, is going into homelessness prevention. So we prevent the issue before it happens. I just want to address the point on the Criminal Justice Bill. Government is very clear that no one should be criminalised for having nowhere to live. The Criminal Justice Bill only gives powers to the police and local authorities when behaviour causes damage, distress, harassment or disruption. Guidance will be issued which makes it clear that outreach and support should be prioritised.
Yes. Mr Speaker, I welcome that the government is investing £2.4 billion on tackling homelessness and rough sleeping. And notwithstanding what my honourable friend just said, does my honourable friend agree with me that we need to help people off the streets, not risk criminalising them, as is regrettably proposed in part of the Criminal Justice Bill?
I thank my honourable friend for his words welcoming government expenditure on rough sleeping and homelessness. I would say that government is very, very focused on helping the most vulnerable in our society, who are often rough sleepers. This is a cross-government effort. I work very closely with the Department of Education on care leavers, for instance. I work very closely with the Health Department, with those who have got addictions. And I want to reassure my honourable friend that no one will be criminalised simply for sleeping rough.
Mike Ainsbury.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As well as trying to criminalise rough sleepers, put them in jail, give them a hefty fine, it's crystal clear that the government won't meet its target to end rough sleeping by 2024, the end of 2024. It's all too plain to see. You know, as you walk into this place, you go in any city or any town, and you see the tragic consequences of government policies. Isn't it now time ministers did the right thing and end Section 21 no-fault evictions for good? No ifs, no buts, no excuses and narratives around the courts, and build the homes for social rent at scale that the country needs. If you don't, we will.
I thank my honourable friend for those comments. I'd just like to say that we are abolishing Section 21. We are building affordable homes. And where are affordable homes not being built? In London.
Andrew Salou.
Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. We are taking significant steps to speed up the planning system in large infrastructure projects through the NSIP Action Plan and through the Great Getting Britain Building Paper, and in the TCPA area of that, we're offering greater clarity through the republication of the National Planning Policy Framework, greater consistency through telling and instructing local councils to ensure they discharge their responsibilities, and greater capacity through additional support to local councils.
Can I convey the extreme irritation of 2 parishes in my constituency which have had 5 locations for a mobile phone mast turned down? And isn't it time, given that mobile connectivity is now an essential requirement, that local authorities advise which technically feasible locations they would be prepared to grant planning permission on, so local people could then say where they were happiest, and we'd end this stupid cat and mouse game that just wastes time and means people don't get the connectivity they need?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that connectivity is absolutely vital in all of our communities and is incumbent upon local councils, including his own council in Bedfordshire, to make sure that they are providing the greatest clarity possible for that connectivity and to ensure that it is put in place.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is extremely supportive of efforts to bring together people of different faiths and beliefs. The Faith Minister meets regularly with faith leaders to encourage these efforts, and the department has funded a range of partners, including near neighbours and strengthening faith institutions, to organise local-level interfaith dialogue.
Thank her for that answer. But 2 months ago, the Secretary of State announced that he would pool funding from the Interfaith Network, which is the largest interfaith charity on these islands. It will close next week after 40 years. I think that the UK government choosing now to choose Britain's main forum for Muslim-Jewish dialogue is an astonishing decision. The Secretary of State could still reverse that very poor decision, but that would have to happen this week. What are the chances of that?
Let me explain what occurred. The closure of the Interfaith Network is a matter for the Interfaith Network as an independent charity. It is not a matter for government. We have always made it very clear to all charities which receive government funding that they need to have sustainable sources of other funding. And in the urgent question that I took about a month ago, I made it very clear the reasons why and the reason, I repeat the reason, is that the decision to withdraw the funding was taken because of the appointment of a member of the Muslim Council of Britain as our trustee, and governments of various different hues have decided that they will not deal with the Muslim Council of Britain.
Now comes Topital's Patricia Gibson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Shift is an inspirational charity run by a visionary social entrepreneur, Sophie Humphreys. It works in order to ensure that young people at risk of engaging with the criminal justice system are diverted to better outcomes. On Thursday of this week, 2 new Shift interventions will open in Middlesbrough and in Redcar in Cleveland, with the support of £3.9 million from my department. Proof that when it comes to intervening early to give young people a better life, it's the Conservative government and a Conservative mayor in Tees Valley that are delivering for the most vulnerable.
Patricia Gibson.
The Levelling Up funds awarded to my constituency 3 years ago for the upgrade of the B714 is not still delivered. However, when raising concerns that this funding is insufficient, the funding is insufficient for this upgrade given inflationary pressures, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up told me to raise this with the Department of Transport, which in turn referred me back to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up. Can I have an explanation from the Secretary of State as to how approved projects can proceed as envisaged, even if funding is delivered, if inflation is not factored into this funding?
Hear, hear.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for making that point, and I can offer her now a meeting with me and, of course, with the member of the Scottish Parliament for North Ayrshire and North Ayrshire Council in order to make sure we can deliver this project, because I know that she is absolutely committed to making sure that the Levelling Up Fund, UK government money, is spent effectively in her constituency, proof that we work better together.
Virginia Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, Arnismore is looking forward to hosting the 4th Island Forum on the 7th and 8th of May. It's an opportunity to showcase our heritage, our culture and our language. It's also an opportunity for the Minister to see firsthand the £17 million from the UK Levelling Up Fund is transferring Holyhead. Would the Minister accept my invitation to visit St Cubby's Church, the Akeldra Centre and the Nearest shelters to see how the UK government is creating jobs and a brighter future for Holyhead? And would he sign up to my Aldi to Amloch campaign?
Diolch. I can only say that I'm looking forward more than I can say to visiting Inos Mon. It is a fantastic example of a brilliant Conservative MP securing funding for Wales, for the Welsh language, for Welsh jobs and for Welsh investment. And may I say, Anglesey has never flourished in the way that it's flourishing with her as its MP.
SNP spokesperson Adam Casey.
Mr Speaker, the Tories continually prioritise their banker mates over the rest of the country. We know that, and an example of this was in the spring budget, where the Chancellor announced levelling up funding for Canary Wharf, an area home to some of the world's biggest banks, which will receive more than £16,000 per head in funding commitments compared to Scotland. With the Leader of the Opposition and his Labour Party backing Tory tax and spending plans and U-turning and capping bankers' bonuses, does the Minister agree with me that the Labour Party offer no real alternative for the people of Scotland?
Can I just remind everyone, we are on topicals, Secretary of State.
Well, I think SNP press releases have suffered recently as a result of the travails that the chief executive of that party has been suffering. But as SNP press releases go, that has to be one of the weakest I've ever heard in this House. The Scottish Government at the moment are closing Visit Centre Scotland. They can't deliver ferries. Scotland is plunging down educational league tables. And when it comes to delivering services in Scotland, theatres, community centres and councils are coming to us for cash. The Scottish Government is a disaster. And all she can do is repeat the failed talking points 20...
Secretary of State, that's completely outrageous after I've just said we are on topicals. Please don't take advantage of your own members. It's not fair to them and it's not fair to the rest of the Chamber. So Lynn Saxby.
Mr Speaker, what steps has my right honourable friend taken to attract long-term landlords back to small coastal towns?
My honourable friend has been a long-standing campaigner for the need to ensure that there is balance within coastal communities, and I know both my honourable friend and colleagues from the South West and elsewhere are very keen to see some of the reforms which the Government are bringing forward on short-term lets and changes to the planning system.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the 2019 Conservative Manifesto, they made this commitment. We will continue with our reforms to leasehold, including implementing our ban on the sale of new leasehold homes, restricting ground rents to a peppercorn and providing necessary mechanisms of redress for tenants. This still hasn't happened. So either they didn't believe it then, or they hadn't thought it through, or the Minister's been nobbled by the Prime Minister. Which one is it?
Well, our leasehold reform bill is making great progress in the House of Lords. It's being debated today, and I look forward to the right honourable gentleman supporting it when it comes back here and gets onto the statute book.
Richard Bacon. Dan Joseph. John Jarvis.
Given proximity to the local and general elections, can the Secretary of State give an assurance that the Joint Election Security Preparedness Unit has all of the resources it needs to do the job?
A tremendously serious issue. My department, other government departments, led by the Security Minister from the Home Office, are spending a huge amount of time, effort and resource in ensuring the safety of candidates, the safety and security and robustness of the process, and to ensure that all of those who wish to take part in our democratic functions in whichever fora they happen to manifest themselves can do so safely and securely. That is a very firm commitment. He will know that we are dealing with that as a serious matter.
Wendy Morton.
Mr Speaker, in constituencies such as Aldridge Brown Hills, our green belt is precious. Once it's gone forever. But in the West Midlands, thanks to the leadership and the vision of Mayor Andy Street and his brownfield-first approach, we have seen 16,000 new homes built and thousands of new jobs on brownfield land. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that this clearly demonstrates you can build the new homes that we need and protect the green belt, and it's Andy Street who's setting the pace and leading the way in the West Midlands? Yeah.
Spot on. It's Andy Street and Conservative councils in Walsall and in Dudley and in Solihull that are delivering houses and protecting the green belt. Better for economic growth, better for the environment, better than bankrupt Labour Birmingham.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 1,000 families in Luton South are stuck in temporary accommodation, with wait times ranging from 3 to 9 months for a one-bed property to 8 to 9 years for a three-bed. Wow. Across the country, there's been a staggering 119% increase in temporary accommodation numbers since 2010. Does the Minister agree with me that this is just a direct cost of 14 years of Conservative failure when it comes to housing?
Yeah.
This government is very, very focused on temporary accommodation. That is why we are investing £2.4 billion, of which £1.2 billion is specifically the homelessness prevention grant. I would also say that at the last budget, we increased the LHA rate to the 30th percentile. That's worth £1.2 billion. And we also have increased the local authority housing fund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please can my right honourable friends set out what the government is doing to ensure that more young people can live in their own home as early as possible in their adult lives, and specifically if greater consideration can be given to mechanisms that result in only one affordable payment to be made a month rather than one mortgage payment and one rental payment.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point, and we do need to look to reform both the mortgage market and our planning system, and we'll be bringing forward further steps on both in coming weeks.
Tim Farron.
Mr. Speaker, in communities such as Kendal, Appleby, Aliceway and Milnthorpe, we've seen developers use viability assessment to renege on building desperately needed, genuinely affordable homes. So will the government give planning authorities the power to declare null and void any planning permission where the developer cannot or will not deliver the affordable homes that they had promised?
I know how important it is to deliver affordable homes in the Lake District, in the Right Honourable Gentleman's constituency. We will take a close look at the specific examples that he cites in order to make sure that we're not killing the geese that lay the golden eggs.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Tourism is vital to Bournemouth's economy, and half of our visitors come by car. But a few, however, choose to park on double yellow lines for the day, as the parking penalty is only £35, unlike here in London, where it's £65, increasing to £130 if not paid promptly. Would the Secretary of State agree it would immensely help Bournemouth and indeed ensure emergency vehicle access was not blocked if Bournemouth was allowed to operate the same penalties as we have here in London?
My right honourable friend is right. Antisocial parking is a blight outside London, and we do need to review extending the powers that are currently exercised in London to other parts of the country.
Brenda Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Time and time again, leaseholder owners come to me with unfair bills for service charges. They are inflated or even for undelivered services. When I get involved, they are often dropped by a third instantly. What will this government do to make sure developers are not trying to rip off homeowners and instead get bills right at first time?
Fair point. Frank Dobson said he was going to reform the leasehold system in 1995. We're doing it now, and it's the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Bill, which my honourable friend, the member for North East Derbyshire, is piloting through, that will bring relief to leaseholders.
Jason McCartney.
Mr. Speaker, a raft of Labour councillors in Kirklees have resigned from their party, with one of them describing their leadership as a toxic swamp. So it'll come as no surprise to my right honourable friend that the local Conservative campaign to split Kirklees and get better leadership and accountability is really gathering momentum. Does he agree with me? It needs to be locally driven, and the best way to achieve that is to vote for more Conservative councillors on the 2nd of May.
No, it's just not fair. Please, tell me which ones you don't want and it'll make my job easier. Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We need change in Kirklees, and the best way in which people can demonstrate their desire for change and the reconfiguration of Kirklees is by voting Conservative on May the 2nd.
Alex Sobel.
Today's Earth Day. The government introduced the zero carbon home standard and then scrapped it. The Code for Sustainable Homes and then scrapped it. We now have the Future Home Standard, which I support, but local authorities such as Leeds want to go above in planning policy to higher standards. Why will the Secretary of State not allow Leeds to build even better zero carbon homes?
Well, we have a good relationship with Leeds Council and indeed its leader and chief executive, so let me investigate.
Thanks, Gibson.
Speaker, Ben Houchen has done a remarkable job saving our airport, overseeing the redevelopment of Teesworks and securing new jobs. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that with Ben's record of delivery and promise of more, voters should back Ben on the 2nd of May?
I mean, the Speaker says that is an easy one, and it is an easy one. You are right, Mr. Speaker. Everyone should back Ben Houchen.
I'm going to be actually help. It's an easy one for you to answer. Now, let's move on. Who are we going to now? Deirdre Brooke.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Can I thank the Minister for Local Government for his reply to my letter of the 21st of March. He said a short paper on the topic of the Union was prepared by officials and presented to the UK Government in July 2020. A media report at the time, though, suggests that an employee of Hanbury Strategy had provided data and helped prepare that paper for the Cabinet. So was public money used for the Insights Hanbury Strategy prepared for that paper, and when will the public get to see them?
Well, once again, I have to admire the sheer chutzpah of Scottish National Party members talking about the misappropriation of cash. But it is the case that the Scottish Government's budget, as I mentioned earlier, has led to the closure of 25 tourist information centres and the closure of a variety of other ventures that are trying to get investment into Scotland, whereas it's the UK Government that is providing investment in Scotland, proving once again we're better together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in my Cleethorpes constituency are growing increasingly concerned about the number of planning applications that are being approved, particularly in rural areas, when quite evidently the infrastructure and public services cannot cope with the demand. What plans do ministers have to ensure local residents can have more say in the future?
The new National Planning Policy Framework, as enacted by this team, will ensure that local voices determine the shape of local communities.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you. My constituents who live on the Abbotsmoor estate in Port Talbot are locked into paying unjustified and extortionate ground rent fees and charges with poor maintenance. So will the Secretary of State commit to strengthening the Leasehold and Reform Bill by ensuring all leaseholders have the right to vary their lease, set ground rent to a peppercorn, ensure premiums as cheap as possible, regulate managing agents and abolish forfeiture?
Well, I always listen with respect to arguments made by Kinnock, and on this case I think he's broadly in the right territory.
Greg Smith.
Speaker, what steps are being taken to ensure planning authorities and, more importantly, the planning inspectorate are utilising the powers in the new NPPF to protect land used in food production?
Well, the NPPF could not be clearer about that, and the new Chief Executive of the Planning Inspectorate is very aware of how important it is to make sure that there is public confidence in the NPPF.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency has some of the highest levels of health inequalities in the country, which has been further increased by the cost of living crisis and the continual cuts we are getting to council budgets. Can I ask the Minister, if they are serious about levelling up, why was Bradford East's bid into reducing health inequalities knocked back?
I would say that the Labour leadership in Bradford Council must look to its performance, and I think there is a distinction to be drawn between the Labour leadership in Leeds and the Labour leadership in Bradford, and I think Bradford could learn a lot from what Leeds have done. This is not a party political point, it is a point about failure specifically in Bradford.
Final question, Tom Hunt.
My constituents got significant concerns about crime and antisocial behaviour in the town centre. Public space protection orders can play an important role, but the local Labour Council refuse to use the powers they have. We have groups of men drinking alcohol in the middle of the town centre, and they do nothing. Does the Secretary of State agree that, yet again, Ipswich Labour should step up?
It's sad but not surprising that Labour and Ipswich have failed again. That's why it's so important that people vote Conservative at the Police and Crime Commissioner elections on May the 2nd. There are few more effective scourges of crime than the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, Tim Passmore, and my honourable friend who does such a brilliant job in Ipswich.
That completes questions. The front bench clear. Right, we now come to the urgent question. Lynn Brown.
I am so very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Deputy Foreign Secretary if he'll make a statement on the government's response to the crisis in Sudan?
Deputy Foreign Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Britain is pursuing all diplomatic avenues to press the warring parties into a permanent ceasefire, to allow unrestricted humanitarian access to protect civilians and to commit to a sustained and meaningful peace process. I visited Eastern Chad last month. I met with refugees who had lost everything and were fleeing conflict and hunger. I was greatly moved by what I saw, and I reaffirmed Britain's steadfast commitment to the people of Sudan. 88% of those crossing the border were women and children. On Monday, to mark 1 year of brutal conflict in Sudan, Britain announced its third raft of sanctions targeting 2 entities linked to the RSF and 1 entity linked to the SAF. On the same day, my noble friend Lord Bennion represented the UK at the Paris Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Sudan and its neighbours. On behalf of the UK, he pledged £89 million, a near doubling of UK ODA for Sudan from the previous year. He delivered a strong message with international partners, which, along with Britain's sanctions, sends a clear signal to the warring parties that they must stop fighting and meaningfully engage in the peace process. We welcome, Mr. Speaker, we continue to lead at the United Nations Security Council, where we hold the pen on Sudan. On the 8th of March, the UN Security Council adopted a UK-drafted Ramadan ceasefire resolution calling for immediate cessation of hostilities. On the 20th of March, we warned that obstruction of humanitarian access by the SAF and RSF is resulting in the starvation of the Sudanese people. Over the last year, Mr. Speaker, Britain has provided £42.6 million in humanitarian aid to support people in Sudan, including £12.2 million to UNICEF for nutrition activities and approximately £23 million to the Sudan Humanitarian Fund for multi-sector response, including a high proportion of food security interventions. Britain has also helped those fleeing to neighbouring countries. Last year we provided £7.75 million to support new and existing Sudanese refugees in South Sudan and £15 million to Chad. Mr. Speaker, we continue to advocate for a return to a civilian-led government, and we urge all Sudanese stakeholders to engage in an inclusive dialogue that will deliver the peace and stability that the Sudanese people deserve.
I am grateful for that answer. The sheer horror unleashed by the General's War in Sudan is appalling to recount. We're approaching 9 million forcibly displaced, evidence of systematic sexual violence and heinous mass atrocities in Darfur and elsewhere. 3.5 million Sudanese children under the age of 5 are acutely malnourished, and massive famine, now seen as almost inevitable. Some models project up to 1 million deaths. As the UN Secretary General said, this is a war on the Sudanese people, and it must end with an immediate ceasefire. So I strongly welcome the sanctions from last week and the additional humanitarian funding. But is there going to be a dedicated high-level Sudan envoy? And what conversations are ministers having with those who continue to fund and enable this war? Because greater coordination has to be the priority. All states must recognise the truly disastrous consequences if Sudan collapses, not just for the Sudanese people, but for the entire region. But there is hope, because through all the horror and the destruction, despite the blocks on humanitarian access, Sudanese people are still standing together in their own communities. The resistance committees and the emergency rooms are sometimes the sole source of relief as famine spreads and medical access runs out for the sick and injured. And they are the undaunted spirit and hope of a Sudan free from the generals and their catastrophic war. So can I ask the Minister, how can we correct the mistakes of the past and back Sudanese civilians directly?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady very much for the eloquent way in which she has outlined the position in Sudan. She is absolutely right. On the subject of the Sudan envoy, let me assure her that there is a very strong, very experienced envoy who covers the Horn of Africa, and she focuses particularly on Sudan. She eloquently set out the wider effects of Sudan continuing on this path in the region, and I agree with her. And she also made clear the benefit that the emergency rooms, sometimes the only source of relief, are providing. She asks about the mistakes that have been made in the past in respect of civilian rule. Britain has called, I think, across all parts of this House, for a ceasefire so that the generals take their troops back to barracks and the political space has a chance to advance. She will know that Abdallah Hamdok and Takadam, the civil society political grouping, have been working together, supported by Britain, in a conference in Addis Ababa and elsewhere. And we are very committed to trying to work with them so that there is one sensible but broad political offer for Sudan as and when the chance of a ceasefire and the political track re-engaging takes place.
Chair of the Intelligence Committee, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the government have any evidence which it can share with this House of the involvement of major foreign powers in what is happening in this terrible conflict in Sudan?
My right honourable friend will have seen the reporting in open source of various outlets. The point that the British government makes on all occasions is that any arms supply into Sudan merely prolongs this conflict, and we urge anyone who is thinking of supplying either side or supplying either side to think very carefully and to desist.
MP's spokesperson Brendan Harlan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Royal Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights released their detailed report into the genocide in Darfur. The report described atrocity crimes, including massacres, sexual violence, the burning of villages and destruction of key infrastructure, all targeting Darfurians in the region. The authors of that report say just 20 years after the first genocide, the same perpetrators are committing the same atrocities against the same innocent groups, all the while evading accountability. Can I ask the Minister, has he read their report and his department planning to meet with the Royal Wallenberg Centre? And what is the government's own assessment of the risk of genocide in Darfur, and how is it planning to implement its obligations under the Genocide Convention? And finally, has a joint assessment of conflict and stability been carried out on the situation in Sudan? And if not, why not? And if it has, will he share those findings with the House?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right to focus on what is happening in Darfur. He will know that we have funded the Centre for Information Resilience, which investigates attacks on civilians and is monitoring and keeping records wherever possible, so that there can, at some point one day, be an accountability and no impunity. He will also be aware that the position in Darfur, and he asked me this question specifically, bears all the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing. I first visited Darfur in 2005 and again in 2006 with the Foreign Secretary, and it has been a significant preoccupation of this House, and quite rightly so. He may rest assured that we are doing everything we possibly can to support the poor and long-suffering people of Darfur in every way we can, but he will equally understand the physical constraints on being able to do that in the way we would wish.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis in decades, and the war that the world choose to ignore. Last week, members of the all-party group from Sudan heard from eyewitnesses and aid workers. We heard of 5 million people on the brink of famine. We heard of aid convoys being held at gunpoint, aid being looted, 50 aid workers murdered. The war, the misery has gone on for a year, and it is getting worse. People want to know what the UK, as the penholder at the UN, is doing to try to shift the dial and bring peace. So on behalf of the all-party group, what pressure are we putting on the UAE and Iran to stop them supplying arms? What actions are being taken to enable the aid convoys to move? What is being done to end the culture of impunity? Why have those who have already been indicted for genocide never been held to account? And why will the UK not appoint a dedicated envoy so that we can show that we put all of our diplomatic weight behind the efforts to find peace?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, we always consider whether or not the issue of the envoy could be boosted. As I said to the Honourable Lady, we think that the position at the moment is providing maximum effect, but we keep these matters under review, and I particularly want to pay tribute to her and the APPG for the work that they are doing. And she's entirely right in what she says. The UN issued a white note on the 15th of March, warning of the risk of conflict-induced famine. 21 humanitarian aid workers have been murdered at least. There are 8.6 million people displaced, and nearly 18 million people are suffering acute levels of food insecurity. That is 40% of the population, and amongst them are 730,000 children who are facing the deadliest form of malnutrition.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been said, with almost 25 million people in Sudan in need of assistance, more than 8 million people left displaced, and the lives of 230,000 children and new mothers at grave risk now due to famine. The UN OCHA now report that they need $2.7 billion to meet the huge humanitarian need in the country. Now, I note from what the Minister said today that the UK has doubled the humanitarian aid that it has committed. But does the Minister agree with me that this still falls far short of the threshold, and ultimately it will be able to achieve very little if there isn't a ceasefire and an end to the fighting to allow it to be distributed safely? So what is the UK government doing along with our international partners to make sure we achieve the immediate and lasting ceasefire sooner rather than later?
He is right, Mr. Speaker, that a ceasefire is absolutely essential, with the troops returning to barracks and the opening up of a political track. And that is the central thrust of the British government's policy. He acknowledges that we have managed nearly to double aid to £89 million this year. And of course, for South Sudan, which addresses many of the problems of Sudan as well, that figure is £111 million. More than double for this financial year, and includes multilateral and bilateral spend. And the fact that Britain has doubled its contribution gives it a locus, which was very well used by my noble friend Lord Benyon last week in Paris at the Sudan conference, to make the point about other countries as well supporting the desperate plight that so many find themselves in Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I very much welcome this urgent question and indeed the government's response. We regularly talk about what's going on in Ukraine and indeed the Middle East, but we don't focus on Africa, the continent, and indeed Sudan, the country itself, which is now turning into a failed state. There's every prospect, Mr. Speaker, of what's going on in Sudan to spill out into other parts of Africa, Central Africa, and indeed the Sahel. Could the Deputy Foreign Secretary update the House on whether we have any presence in the port of Sudan? And also, he talked about peace talks. Egypt is also engaged in these. Could he update the House on the prospects of what's happening to bring the necessary parties together?
Mr. Speaker, in respect to his final point, we are hopeful that the third set of negotiations in Jeddah will take place. The Saudis have committed on April the 15th for this to happen in early May, and we are extremely grateful to the Saudis for that, and also inviting the UAE, Egypt, the African Union and IGAD to be part of those negotiations. The former chairman of the Defence Select Committee is right about the danger of contagion across the region. We are doing everything we can to support Abdallah Hamdok and the Takadam, as I mentioned earlier. And in terms of our support within Sudan, the ambassador is currently based in Addis Ababa and is working energetically with all the relevant parties to try and make progress.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, the Sudanese community in my Liverpool Riverside constituency will be decidedly underwhelmed with your response to this urgent question, because you mentioned about supporting people moving to neighbouring areas, but what you don't mention is the Sudanese who've lived and worked and contributed for years to the UK to bring over family members fleeing the conflict, or to extend student visas or protections for Sudanese asylum seekers. Minister, what will it take for the UK to provide a visa programme for Sudanese asylum seekers similar to the Ukrainian scheme?
Well, the two situations, Mr. Speaker, are not analogous, and if the Labour Party wants to launch a campaign for extra visas and a special scheme matching the one in Ukraine, I look forward to hearing details of it.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Now, my wife and I spent a wonderful holiday a few years ago in Sudan, and it was amazing to see the amazing people there, but also the rich cultural heritage which Sudan has to offer. There's many World Heritage sites, the pyramids of Meroe, more pyramids in Sudan than Egypt, the ancient cathedrals there, and even Lord Kitchener's boat. Now, we hear that fighting has spread to some of the World Heritage areas, and I know UNESCO are protecting two World Heritage areas, Meroe and Jebel Bakhol, under the Heritage Emergency Fund, which the UK government does contribute to. But what further what further money can the UK do to help protect this World Heritage, bolster UNESCO, and protect these ancient and important aspects of our civilization?
My honourable friend is right about the deep heritage and also the very deep links which exist between Britain and Sudan, have done for very many years, which include heritage links. But the truth of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that we have to do everything we can, holding the pen at the United Nations as we do on Sudan, to achieve this ceasefire and the reopening of political space. If we are able to do that, we will be able to focus directly on the points that my honourable friend has made.
Live effort.
Speaker, can the Minister say what discussions he's had with other countries to bring pressure to bear to stop the flow of arms into this conflict and try to bring it to an end as soon as possible?
Mr. Speaker, these discussions are taking place in the margins of the United Nations and indeed of the conference that took place in Paris on Monday last week. And he is right to emphasise that we need to ensure that arms do not fuel this conflict, and that is why Britain urges everyone to ensure that there is no further arming of either party. The arms embargo goes the whole way over Darfur and would be over the whole of Sudan if the Chinese and the Russians were willing to sign up with the rest of us to implement it.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You absolutely caught me off balance there, you know. I was just about to take my diabetic tablets whenever you called me, so that's one for later. Can I thank the Minister very much for his answers to the UQ? The Minister will be very aware that more than 9,000 people have been killed, nearly 6 million displaced, and persecution that Christians are facing. So what support is government offering to NGOs such as church missionaries who are on the ground seeking to help Christians who are displaced to not only feed their children, but to provide a semblance of an education and indeed, most importantly, hope of a future life? Thank you.
Well, my honourable friend will understand the great difficulties of helping directly on the ground. But this is something of very great interest, I know, to both him and to the Prime Minister's envoy for freedom of religion and belief. And we must continue to find every possible way of supporting the important groups which he mentions.
Lawrence Session-Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the Minister hasn't read it, I'd draw him to briefing and report by Zainab Mohammed Saleh, a Sudanese journalist, who records her account on the BBC website where she states, and I quote, "People who have told me of ethnically targeted killings and sexual violence. They remain traumatised months afterwards." And the Minister may be aware that months before this war broke out, sexual violence and gender-based violence was being used against women. In June 2023, it was estimated that over 60,000 survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in Sudan, and we continue to see reports of sexual violence. Can I ask the Minister what steps the government is taking to address this really important issue and prevent further cases of violence and rape being used as a war weapon?
Well, I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that the Honourable Lady is entirely right, and we have read these reports and many other reports with horror. That is one of the reasons why we are supporting the Centre for Information Resilience, so that we can do everything we can to deter any question of impunity. But it is extraordinarily difficult, and as she rightly says, in Darfur, what is happening bears all the hallmarks of ethnic cleansing.
Sean Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The attention paid to the conflict in Sudan does not reflect the scale, the enormity of the suffering there, with millions displaced facing famine, violence, insecurity. And as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Africa, I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for West Ham, for bringing this urgent question. Now, the Minister spoke about the arms embargo, such as it is limited. Is he aware that it is being broken on a grand scale and the pervasive flow of arms into Sudan? And what is he doing to monitor that and to try and reduce the flow of arms which fuel this conflict?
Well, on the second point that she makes about the supply of arms, I've set out the clear message from the British government on that. On the first point that she makes, she is right that the conflicts elsewhere in the world, particularly in Ukraine and Gaza, have to some extent taken attention away from Sudan, and indeed Ethiopia, where Britain was leading in Geneva last Tuesday the effort to raise money to head off a famine there. So part of the benefit of this urgent question today is to make clear both the threat and what is happening in Sudan, but also what Britain is doing to try and assist.
Joanna Cherry.
Sudanese students at Heriot-Watt University in my Edinburgh South West constituency were desperately worried about their family members in Sudan when I met with them last year at the request of the university chaplain. Many of their family members needed help to flee to neighbouring countries, and others have sought family reunification with British citizens already living here. Can he tell me what the government is doing to help British citizens save the lives of their relatives in Sudan?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, she will know the steps which Britain took a year ago to help those who were seeking to leave. But since then, the vast amount of migration has been across the border into Chad and into South Sudan, and indeed into Ethiopia. And Britain has contributed £15 million to help those whom I saw near Adre on the border between Sudan and Chad just at the end of last month, but also in respect of South Sudan, where there is a very significant and increased programme of humanitarian support. We have directly contributed nearly £8 million.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met the community president and the Secretary General of the Sudanese Community Association of Greater Manchester, where we discussed the horrific civil war in Sudan and the desperate need to bring about a peaceful and sustainable end to the conflict. The war may be taking place in Sudan, but it has a huge implications for Sudanese communities in Britain, like the one in Manchester. So I also ask, what support is the Foreign Office providing Sudanese communities in Britain who are trying to support their loved ones who are fleeing and from the violence and to reach a place of safety?
Mr. Speaker, there is very little we can do until they reach a place of safety. And as I said, many have fled across the border into Chad and also into South Sudan. And we are actively helping those people in the way that I described.
Hannah.
Mr. Speaker, Sudan is experiencing the worst displacement crisis in the world. It isn't so much a civil war as a war on civilians who are losing their homes and their livelihoods and their lives on a scale that it's very hard to comprehend. Sudanese people do feel forgotten, so it's vital that both aid and political focus are forthcoming. As well, will the Minister work with his colleagues in the Home Office to support Sudanese people currently in the asylum system who are beside themselves with worry about family members, and better facilitate reunion for those UK citizens who have family who are among the most affected and able to leave? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we will of course do everything we can to assist. She will understand the constraints under which we work, but I will note what she has said. And in particular, if she has any specific cases which she wishes to raise, I hope she will do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given the level of death, despair and starvation, we need an immediate ceasefire in Sudan. But also, cross-border and cross-line humanitarian aid access is being blocked and impaired by both sides, even though they are in effect starving their own people to death. So, Deputy Foreign Secretary, what steps is the government taking to get the Adre crossing opened and to expose the impact of RSF extortion on humanitarian aid convoys?
Well, in respect of the point that he has made about Adre, that was where I was when I was on the border between Chad and the Sudan. And I saw the weight of human misery crossing that border, 88% of whom were women and children, showing that the men had either been murdered or had gone into hiding. So he is quite right about the importance of Adre. And in terms of what he says about the two generals effectively waging war on their own people, and the phrase I think he used was starving their own people. He is right, and that is why everyone is urging these two generals to desist, get their troops back to barracks, and give a chance for a political track to reconvene and re-emerge.
Jessica Morton.
Mr. Speaker, what assurances can the government ministers give the Sudanese community in Newport who feel this conflict and its catastrophic consequences, as others have said, have gone largely unseen, that the government are doing all they can, again with the Adre crossing, to get aid in, and trying as hard as they can to build consensus amongst neighbouring and regional states that the war must end?
Well, I hope very much, Mr. Speaker, that today's urgent question will be of some comfort in respect of what the government is seeking to do, and also in respect of the role we play at the United Nations, where we are the pen holder, but also the role we play in the Troika with Norway and the United States to try and bring this awful crisis to a conclusion.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The information we've received via Al Jazeera and others is truly horrendous about what the situation is in Sudan. 8.2 million people have left their homes, 17.7 million are with food shortages at the present time, and cholera, measles and other diseases are absolutely rife. And unless there is a very rapid ceasefire, the planting season simply won't begin, and there will be even greater and deeper hunger, not just in Sudan, but in neighbouring countries afterwards. Does he have any realistic hope that a combination of the UN and the African Union and anyone else that can intervene will effectively bring about a ceasefire to allow at least people to return to their homes and be able to feed themselves?
Mr. Speaker, the former leader of the opposition makes the case very clearly. The figures which he sets out show the scale of the disaster which has engulfed Sudan. When I was on the border between Chad and Sudan near Adre, I saw for myself the work that was being done by organisations like the World Food Programme, which Britain strongly supports, but also the IRC and indeed Médecins Sans Frontières. The work is going on wherever it can, but it is extremely difficult because of the circumstances he set out.
What assessment has been made of the potential levels of food insecurity and the level of response needed if the conflict goes on through the summer and disrupts the next planting season?
Well, she is entirely right. And, of course, the World Food Programme told me when I was in Chad that effectively they had supplies of food only till the end of May. And that is one of the reasons why Britain has increased so substantially its bilateral aid, and why my noble friend Lord Benyon went to the Paris meeting on Monday last week to make sure that others too put their money where their mouth is and supported the desperate situation which she has described.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Mr Speaker, this morning I had the pleasure to meet with some brilliant organisations who are working on behalf of people in Sudan but who are desperate to be reunited with family here in the UK, and they want to have answers to two questions. First of all, why is it taking over a year for many of these applications to be decided given the circumstances that they're having to live in? And secondly, why is it that the government demands that these people have to make dangerous and illegal cross-border journeys before they'll even consider the applications because they have to enrol biometric information? That seems completely counterintuitive. Will they give the Home Office a polite kick up the backside and urge a change in approach?
If the honourable gentleman would like to give me details of any specific cases, I will of course make sure that they are looked into.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What steps is the government able to take to stem the flow of resources to the RSF? Not only weapons, but fuel across the border from Libya. And is the government monitoring the potential for onwards flow to Sudan as a result of continuing Russian supply of arms within Libya?
Mr Speaker, we urge all parties not to supply weapons to the belligerents in Sudan. This will merely extend and continue the appalling situation which exists there. And that is why Britain is so clear that we should seek to starve this conflict of any additional weaponry.
Claire Anderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The opposition welcomes the government's atrocity monitoring and prevention work in Sudan, even though it's belated. But it's also important to join up this work with our diplomatic efforts in support of talks in Jeddah next month, which are inclusive and effective. So is there a strategy to use targeted pressure to help isolate those responsible for atrocities and bring them to justice and bring both warring parties to the table?
Well, in respect of targeted pressure, she will have seen the recent announcements about sanctions against both the RSF and the SAF, and the earlier steps that were taken as well. And she's right to focus on Jeddah 3, which looks to be the best bet at the moment for progress, and Britain is giving very strong support to that process.
Emily Griffin.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Well, on Monday, the government announced 3 sanctions against businesses supplying arms to the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. What assessment has the Deputy Foreign Secretary made of how effective those will be in the greater scheme of all the arms that are being supplied to those two warring factions?
Well, she's right to focus on the sanctions, and although we don't talk about future plans on sanctions across the floor of the House, the way these things work is when we see that sanctions are not working as well as we had hoped, we will always seek to reinforce that. That is the nature of imposing sanctions, as we've seen in other areas as well, and we will do everything we can through the sanctions regime to advance the objective which she and I both share.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister's referred to the problems of food security. It does seem very likely the planting season is going to be disrupted again this year. What are the implications of that for food security in Sudan and South Sudan this autumn and into next year? And has a target been set for the amount of international aid to be gathered to deal with this looming crisis?
Deputy Foreign Secretary.
Well, the targets that are required are the subject of continuous discussion, particularly with the World Food Programme and at the UN, and they help to inform the discussions that took place in Paris last week. But he is right about the dangers of the harvest failing. The lean season approaches in other parts of Africa too, including Ethiopia. This is the nature of climate change, and sometimes factors like El Nino and so forth, and they are extremely worrying. The effect of the harvest failing and the onset of the lean season is very serious indeed in terms of nutrition and food dependency.
Poulos.
I thank the Minister for his previous engagements regarding a number of constituents whose family members have been stuck and affected by the ongoing conflict in Sudan. But can I ask him what conversations he's had with his counterparts in Egypt, who, as far as I understand, are still suspended issuing visas to Sudanese nationals that are holding UK travel documents, meaning people got stuck in Egypt who could well be here with their families right now if that was not being held up by the Egyptian authorities?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have an extremely effective embassy team in Cairo and in Egypt with very close relations across the top of the Egyptian government and in all parts of it. If there are any specific cases which she wishes to raise again, then I hope that she will, and I will certainly take them up for her.
That completes question. Point of order, John Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week on the 15th of April, I said that all trans children and young people deserve access to high quality and timely health care and support, and around 100 studies had not been included in the CAS report, and we needed to know why. Mr. Speaker, I was quoting Stonewall's briefing, and there was some fallout from this. So I spent the weekend in conversation with Stonewall and Dr. Kaz. Mr. Speaker, by quoting this briefing, it seems as though I may have inadvertently misled the House. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, I've been thrown out of Parliament for calling the then Prime Minister a liar, so it means a lot to me to be able to come back and correct the record and practice what I preach. Having spent the weekend speaking to Dr. Kaz, for which I'm very grateful for her time, she's made it clear, not just to me, but to a number of valuable clarifications on the radio and the media to trans and LGBT plus communities, that all reports were included and both high and moderate quality research were considered as part of the evidence review. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Kaz has also said that her report is being misrepresented and hijacked. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It's not by me. My question to the Minister was about additional funding for children's mental health services. This report is being hijacked by anti-trans groups, and that is why it is important that we can be as factual as possible about the research. Mr. Speaker, I was also concerned about the advice that Dr. Kaz was given about her safety, and was shocked that some people implied that I was partly responsible for Dr.
I'm really bothered. It's meant to be just a quick correction and not opening up the debate. You've absolutely, can I say how grateful I am for being honest and correct in the record, and you've absolutely done that and made it very clear that you were correcting it. I've got others to come in. I've got to move on. We cannot open the debate. The clerks are getting very worried. Point of order, Barbara Keeley. Who is up?
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, last week at Culture, Media and Sport Oral Questions, my honourable friends, the member for Bristol West and the member for Slough, raised with the Minister the issue of ticket touting. The Minister claimed 2 points which I believe are inaccurate. First, the Minister claimed that legislation in the Consumer Rights Acts of 2015 and the Digital Economy Act of 2017 dealt with some of the issues around bots in the secondary market. However, there does not seem to have been a single conviction specifically for bot use, and there is a great deal of evidence that bots are still being used. Secondly, the Minister claimed that measures brought to cap resale prices in Ireland have increased fraudulent activity, but in fact there is no evidence whatsoever that fraudulent activity has increased. Fraud was actually reported to be down 27% in Ireland in the last quarter of 2023, and the Irish Government's official post-enactment report on their legislation, the 2021 Sale of Tickets Act, concludes this. This is a positive endorsement of the operation of the Act, and it means that the objectives of the Act are being met, whereby genuine fans can attend events at affordable prices. I seek your advice, Mr. Speaker, about how we might encourage the Minister to correct the record.
I thank the Rule Member for the point of order and for notice of it. It is for the Minister to correct the record if they wish to, and in the meantime she's certainly put the points on the record for everyone to see. We now come to presentations of bills. Sarah Olney.
Thames Water Special Administration Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 21st of June.
Friday, the 21st of June. Right. We now have the clerk to proceed and read the orders of the day.
Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill. Consideration of Lord's message.
Now,
Now, before we move to the consideration of the Lord's message, I can confirm that nothing in the Lord's message engages Commons financial privilege. We'll begin with a government motion to disagree with the Lord's Amendments 3G, with which we will consider the other government motion to disagree with Lord's Amendments 10F as listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendments 3G. Minister Tomlinson.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this House disagrees with the Lords in their amendments 3G and 10F. It appears, Mr. Speaker, that I was indeed optimistic last week when I foresaw the end of ping-pong, and I looked forward to the time when we were not debating this particular piece of legislation. It's disappointing that we're back here again. Of course, the other place should undertake its role as a revising chamber, and of course, they're entitled to ask the government to think again. But we did think again and again, with this House now voting for the third time as part of ping-pong, strongly endorsing this bill. We need to bring the process to a conclusion. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party has voted against our measures to tackle illegal migration 134 times now. 134 times they have told the British people that they oppose our tougher immigration legislation. Enough is enough. The opposition have delayed this bill for too long. We must get on with it. So, Mr. Speaker, of course I give way to the Honourable.
I'm sure the Minister will, like me, have read the Law Society of England and Wales briefing on these amendments. Has he seen polling reported by them which show that the majority of voters think the government should either accept some amendments to the Rwanda policy or scrap it altogether? Only a quarter of the public think the government should try to get the Rwanda bill through in its current form, and all Lord's amendments are supported by the majority of the public. Has he seen that polling, and will he therefore stop trying to turn this into a political football and address the gravamen of the amendments?
I certainly will. I'm very grateful indeed to the Honourable and Learned Lady, because she gets to the point of the amendments themselves. She's absolutely right that we should address them in detail, and I will do just that. But before I do so, I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, I say this with all humility and also with respect for the Minister, who I know is an honourable person. But does the Minister not agree that there's a simple way out of this deadlock? And that is to accept that those who can demonstrate that they were assisting the British forces in Afghanistan. And does the Minister not further agree that this back and forth is not an example of democratic exercise, but rather that of democratic embarrassment? And a way forward must be found before we bring this place and our procedures into disrepute.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful indeed to the Honourable Gentleman. As always, he engages with the substance of the matter. He and his right honourable friend, the member for East Antrim, have raised this point. I'm going to turn to that specific amendment second, and I hope to seek to persuade him by my words that there are steps that have been taken, there are reassurances that have been made, and I hope to reassure him personally that he will be able to support the government in the division lobbies later on today. Mr. Speaker, turning to the Lord's amendment from the noble Lord Hope of Craighead, I just want to reiterate firstly some salient points. Firstly, as this House knows, we will only ratify the treaty once we agree with Rwanda that all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty. Secondly, the implementation of these provisions will be kept under review, as we know, by the Independent Monitoring Committee. Thirdly, Clause 9 of the bill makes clear that the bill provisions come into force when the treaty enters into force. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully
coming into force.
Of course I can.
I know that there's a problem in detaining migrants, illegal migrants at the moment under habeas corpus, but when the bill comes into force, is the legal position that we can then detain people before offshoring them, because that's the only real deterrent?
Minister. Well, my right honourable friend may have heard a few words from the Prime Minister in this regard this morning, and that is exactly right. Specifically, in relation to this amendment, however, I respectfully disagree with the noble Lord Hope. There is no obligation, whether in legislation or in the treaty, to send anyone to Rwanda. As my noble friend Lord Sharp has said, Article 4 of the treaty sets out clearly that it's for the United Kingdom to determine the timing of a request for relocation of individuals under the terms of the agreement and the number of such requests made. Of course, I give way.
Extremely grateful to my right honourable and learned friend, and before he moves away from the treaty, I wonder if he could help with some clarity on the relationship, as the government sees it, between the Rwanda Treaty on the one hand and this bill on the other. Specifically, is it the case that an assessment of Rwanda's safety for the purposes of this bill is the same thing as compliance with the Rwanda Treaty on the part of the state of Rwanda? And if not, what is the difference? Does the concept of safety extend beyond compliance with the treaty, or is it solely limited to the question of compliance with the treaty?
Well, as ever, I'm very grateful to my right honourable and learned friend for his engagement both inside and outside the chamber. He's been a regular attender, Mr. Speaker, as you know, to these ping-pong sessions. In terms of the treaty itself, the treaty is the operating legal instrument between two international bodies, between the United Kingdom and between Rwanda. That is the status of that treaty. This bill brings it into effect in law in this country. And he knows, dealing with the system of dualism, in fact, he's appeared in the Supreme Court arguing these very points himself. So he knows in detail the differences between the treaty and between an Act of Parliament. As I set out within the treaty itself, there is no obligation. It's there, it's plain, it's written, as he knows, in Article 4.1, that the United Kingdom shall not be obliged to make any request for relocation under this agreement. I will do in one moment, and that means that the government would not be obliged to relocate individuals under the terms of the treaty if there had been, for example, unexpected changes of circumstances. And I know that's something that my right honourable friend and learned friend has been concerned about. I give way.
Supporting this exchange, would my honourable friend also care to note that Lord Hoffman, in the case of R versus Lyons, was quite unequivocal when he said that and this was in relation to an ECHR case as well, that the treaty itself is not the same as the statute, in that it is the statute that prevails, and when the statute is made and the words are clear and unambiguous, it follows that the court will obey what the Act itself sets out, which is absolutely exactly what the position is in this case.
And Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has also been a consistent member of these ping-pong sessions, and he has consistently cited that passage. That's paragraph 144 from the Supreme Court judgment, and he knows that I agree with him on this point, and that I firmly believe that this legislation as drafted is clear and is unambiguous, and I hope that reassures him on that point. But again, turning back to my right honourable and learned friend, there are procedures already in place under the terms of the treaty to monitor the safety of Rwanda for those who are relocated there. And I can reassure my right honourable and learned friend and this House that we have already established the right mechanisms so that should the situation ever arise, the government will respond as necessary. And this would include a range of options to respond, including, as my right honourable learned friend knows, any primary legislation if required. But, Mr. Speaker, implementation continues, and I can now confirm that last Friday, the Rwandan Parliament passed their domestic legislation to implement their new asylum system. The partnership is one important component of a much broader bilateral relationship. As my right honourable friend, the member for Witham, has recently reminded us, this is a migration and economic development partnership. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to all officials, including those in the government of Rwanda, for their hard work in implementing the treaty and delivering this crucial partnership. I give way.
I'm most grateful to the Minister for giving way. If Rwanda is truly safe, and I note what he said about last Friday, why is it the case that Rwandans are excluded from this legislation from being returned? And could he give us the reasons, wherefore, why the Prime Minister and himself refused to accept the need to prove the safety of Rwanda as a requirement?
Well said.
Minister.
The proof of the safety is in the international binding treaty between two international partners, namely the United Kingdom and the government of Rwanda. And it is here in the treaty where it matches the concerns as set out by the Supreme Court, namely the concerns in and around refoulement. It is there, it is addressed in the treaty. That is the reassurance that I invite this House to take, and that is why I say that the amendments are unnecessary. Turning specifically, Mr. Speaker, to the second amendment, I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Minister for giving way. The very obvious point about why Rwandans aren't covered by this is if we were returning a Rwandan to Rwanda, we'd take them to their home country, not a third country.
Minister.
Well, again, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend because he has been closely following these proceedings, not just throughout ping pong, but throughout his time as well. When he held this role, and he knows deeply the interplay in the interrelationship between the two countries, and I'm very grateful to him. I'm going to make some progress, actually. I've given way too much. I've taken some criticism for the number of times that I've given way, and so I'm going to make progress, Mr. Speaker. It's the Second Amendment. Speaking to the Amendment 10F, as I and my noble friend Lord Sharp have said previously, this government greatly values the contribution of those who have supported us and our armed forces overseas. And that is why there are legal routes for them to come here to the United Kingdom. And there is already existing legislation, Mr. Speaker, including but not limited to the Illegal Migration Act, which the Secretary of State has a range of powers to consider cases and specific categories of persons. I have already made a clear commitment on behalf of His Majesty's Government that we will consider how removal under existing immigration legislation would apply. And that means that once this review of ARAP decisions for those with credible links to Afghan specialist units has concluded, the government will not remove to Rwanda those who received a positive eligibility decision as a result of this review where they are already in the United Kingdom. Just wait 1 minute, please. As of today. This is an important point, and it's a point that I emphasise today in front of this House. Yes, I give way to them, Lee.
I thank the Minister for giving way. He may have read about my constituent today in The Guardian. A man who was originally Afghan, has British citizenship, served with our armed forces for 15 years. He and his family were called forward to the Barron Court Hotel, could not get there because there was an explosion, and have been in hell ever since. His young children and wife unable to join him here in the UK. He's not eligible for ARAP because he was a British citizen. The government has written to me suggesting that his children might apply to ARAP. I believe under 10-year-olds probably won't qualify. The ACRS scheme is in tatters, will not accept them, because the government is now trying to say, well, they were invited rather than instructed to go to the Barron Court Hotel. If he takes 5 minutes just to read the story of my constituent who gave so much of his life to support our forces in Afghanistan, he will understand why, when he stands at that dispatch box and says that there are legal, safe routes for those who are eminently eligible, it is simply not sustainable as an argument to make, and why this amendment matters.
Well, this amendment is unnecessary. There is already existing legislation. As I've told the Honourable Lady, and I've tried to explain to this House, there is already existing legislation, including but not limited to the Illegal Migration Act. And I have confirmed that the government will not remove to Rwanda those who receive a positive eligibility decision as a result of this review. Mr. Speaker, this government recognises the commitment and responsibility that comes with combat veterans, whether our own or those who have shown courage and served alongside us. We will not let them down. Criminal gangs are determining who comes to the United Kingdom as vulnerable people are being lured into unseaworthy boats and risking their lives. Billions of pounds of taxpayers' money is being spent on illegal migration. Our resources and services are reaching their limits. We must put an end to it. We must pass this legislation and stop the boats. I urge this House once again to send an unambiguous message to the other place. The time has come for the Labour Lords to respect the views of this House and to let this bill now pass.
The question is, this House disagrees with Lords in their Amendment 3G. I now call Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Well, there's not really a huge amount more to be said about this sham, this con of a bill that hasn't already been said. The plan is as unworkable as it is unaffordable, and that's why Labour would instead repurpose the money that's being squandered and set aside for the scheme into a cross-border police unit and security partnership which would go after the criminal gangs upstream and restore order to our border. And we would create a new returns and enforcement unit to remove people from the country who have no right to be here, given that we have seen the return of failed asylum seekers collapsing by 44% under the Conservatives and the removal of foreign criminals decreased by 27%. Our plan will end the Tory boats chaos, fix our broken asylum system and restore our border security. The government's plan is, as the former immigration minister himself described it, and a civil servant insider has admitted, it's to get a few symbolic flights off the ground ahead of a general election, regardless of the wider impact. It really is tokenism and posturing of the worst sort. I will give myself.
I thank my honourable friend for making way on that and highlighting why this is just such a gimmick. Does he agree that when the Permanent Secretary said that there is no evidence it will work as a deterrent, and this plan will only account for just 1% of those crossing the channel?
Well, she's absolutely right that the test of a policy like this is, will it work as a deterrent? But when you're dealing with people who have risked life and limb to cross continents, they are not going to be put off by a 1% chance of being sent to Rwanda. So the policy fails on its own terms, and the Permanent Secretary was absolutely right to put that red flag on it 2 years ago. It's quite extraordinary that we are where we are today. I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making an excellent speech. He spoke about tokenism of the worst sort. Does he agree with me that that was carried on by the Prime Minister's announcement, identifying 25 courtrooms and 150 judges will be available to deal with legal challenges from asylum seekers, giving our courts are struggling with backlogs, partly due to not enough barristers in courts. Exactly. So it would be interesting to know how the government would achieve this. Would my honourable friend agree with me?
Oh, she's absolutely right. I'd actually forgotten about that sort of chapter 562 in this never-ending story. And my recollection is that the Prime Minister was then slapped down, I think, by the judiciary, who said, well, we've got a huge amount of a backlog to get through, and this is not a priority. So I think we should thank my honourable friend for reminding the House of yet another sort of disastrous chapter in this story. I will give way.
In the unlikely event of a Labour government, is the Shadow Minister happy with the idea that in future the opposition parties that necessarily and usually dominate the House of Lords should frustrate a Labour government? So will he advise his friends up there to respect the will of the elected House?
I will advise the other place to do what it is doing as a revising chamber, standing up for the constitutional obligations that it has to look at every piece of legislation that we send to them from this place and to take the measures that they feel strongly about. What we are seeing is a set of amendments which in no way prevents this policy from being enacted, in no way prevents flights from taking off. It is simply those members of the other place doing their constitutional duty. But it's not only that the plan is completely unworkable, Mr. Speaker, it is also shockingly unaffordable. It is likely to cost a truly astonishing £2 million per deportee. And to add insult to injury, it puts the tens of thousands of asylum seekers who are deemed inadmissible and yet cannot be sent to Rwanda because of the lack of capacity there. They will be put into limbo in expensive hotels, stuck in a perma backlog at staggering cost to the taxpayer. Dreadful policy, shameful politics. Mr. Speaker, when this bill was first introduced, the Prime Minister described it as emergency legislation, and yet the government's management of the parliamentary timetable would suggest that the opposite is the case. Ministers had ample opportunity to schedule debates and votes on the 25th and 26th of March before Easter recess, but they chose not to do so. And indeed, last week there was also plenty of scope to accelerate this process. So you could be forgiven for concluding that the truth of the matter is that ministers have been deliberately stringing this out for two reasons. Firstly, because they thought that they could make some grubby political capital from the delay. And secondly, because they've been scrambling to get a flight organised and all the other logistics that are not in place. Indeed, the Prime Minister admitted this in his somewhat whinging and buck-passing press conference this morning, that the first flight to Rwanda won't take off until, checks notes, July. I mean, July, really. Today is the 22nd of April. We were initially told that this was emergency legislation, and yet we're now being told that there'll be a 10 to 12-week delay in getting the first flight off the ground. Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't know about what your definition of an emergency is, but a 10 to 12-week response time does seem to be a bit of a stretch. And of course, given that none of the amendments to the bill could by any stretch of the imagination be seen as wrecking amendments, it really is quite difficult to see why the benches opposite couldn't just accept them and get on with it. Because the fundamental point is that not one of the amendments that have been coming to us from the other place would prevent planes from getting into the air. Turning first to the amendment in the name of the noble Lord Hope. Well, this amendment simply reflects what the government has already said, that court judgments are taken at a moment in time, and that a country may well be safe at a given point, but not at another. And that, if this bill passes unamended, then this House will, in essence, be asserting that Rwanda will be a safe country forevermore. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, surely the indisputable lesson of recent times is that we live in a dangerous and turbulent world, where authoritarians are on the march, and the rules-based order is under threat. So who knows what might happen in Rwanda in the future, or in any other country, for that matter. I will.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. And he will agree with me that, again, the Minister today made the point that just because we've entered into a treaty and we've been told it's safe, that suddenly should be treated as the way forward. Surely that's setting a very serious and dangerous precedent for the future, that we can work our way out of any unsafe country just because we have a treaty with them.
I agree absolutely with my honourable friend, and I thank him for that intervention. I think one of the reasons that we are seeing such a strong pushback from the other place is precisely because they are deeply uncomfortable with trying to make something that is not true. The Supreme Court has ruled unanimously that Rwanda is not a safe country, and yet we are being asked to legislate to say that it is. Now we can legislate to say that the sky is green and the grass is blue, but that does not make it so, and that is why we have such an important point of principle in this bill.
I thank my honourable friend. Just before the honourable lady makes another intervention, I must draw to the attention of the House that we only have till 5:15 to debate this matter. I have 8 people on the back benches who wish to speak. Their speeches at the moment will be limited to 3 minutes, and it might not be entirely fair for the honourable lady to keep making... No, but please, Mr Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Courtesy. Mr Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you. Therefore, the amendment in the name of the noble Lord Hope simply requires the Home Secretary to lay a statement before Parliament confirming that the Rwanda Treaty has been implemented and that the country is safe. And prior to issuing his statement, the Home Secretary would presumably be taking account of advice provided by the government's hand-picked monitoring committee as specified in the treaty. And of course, Lord Hope's amendment also allows the Home Secretary to lay a statement making clear that Rwanda is no longer safe should the situation on the ground in Rwanda change. This trust but verify approach is embedded in countless pieces of legislation that have made their way onto the statute book over the centuries. It is a perfectly fair, measured, reasonable and non-controversial proposal, and frankly it's simply bizarre and incomprehensible that the government is refusing to accept it. Turning now to the amendment in the name of the noble Lord Brown, frankly, I just don't know where to start with this one, Madam Deputy Speaker. It beggars belief that the government is still insisting on being able to deport Afghans who have bravely fought alongside British forces against the Taliban to Rwanda. It really is shameful that we are still debating what should be a given. We owe a debt of gratitude to the Afghans who stood shoulder to shoulder with our troops, and yet this government is seeking to trash our reputation as a country that honours its debts. What a disgrace. Ministers should hang their heads in shame. Now, over the course of the last few weeks, they've deployed a variety of spurious and mealy-mouthed arguments to defend their position. But the one they have most frequently used is that there are already safe and legal routes in place in the shape of the ARAP and ACRS schemes. But this is simply not the case, Madam Deputy Speaker. Operation Warm Welcome became Operation Cold Shoulder when the Prime Minister torpedoed both schemes and left these Afghans stranded. Shocking but true. Court documents show that in November 2022, the Prime Minister issued instructions to halt flights from neighbouring Pakistan for an entire year for Afghans who had already been granted resettlement rights in the UK, and only restarted them when the Pakistani government threatened to send these heroic individuals back across the border to meet their fate at the hands of the Taliban. Just let the content of those court documents sink in, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom explicitly instructed the Ministry of Defence and the Home Office to stop assisting Afghans who had put their lives on the line for our country. What a disgrace. What a betrayal of British values. What a hammer blow to our moral standing in the world. But the noble Lord Brown's amendment is not only driven by a basic moral imperative, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is also driven by our national interest and by military logic, for the simple and obvious reason that the ability of our armed forces to recruit local allies to support us in the future will be severely constrained if this bill passes unamended. It should therefore not come as a surprise to anyone that our armed forces are outraged and repelled by the government's refusal to accept Lord Brown's amendment. Indeed, just last weekend, 13 senior military figures signed a letter to the Sunday Telegraph stating robustly that any brave men and women, and I quote, who have fought alongside our armed forces or served the UK government overseas must be exempt from removal to Rwanda. Madam Deputy Speaker, I therefore urge all those across the House to join with me in supporting these two amendments that are in front of us today. This whole process has been a farce, but if we can just pass these amendments, we can at least send a message that we are not a country that chooses to deport its military allies to a country on the other side of the world, and that we are a country that cares about whether or not we are sending some of the most vulnerable people on the planet to a place which is safe for them. At the very least, we owe that basic level of respect and decency to ourselves as a nation and to the people that this policy will affect. Unfortunately, respect and decency for anyone, whether it's in relation to our nation, to asylum seekers, or indeed to the British taxpayer, is not something that this Prime Minister and his government hold in any regard whatsoever. And that is why their time is up. They are not fit to govern. And I fear tonight that they will demonstrate that point in spades yet again. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
As I've just intimated, there will be an immediate time limit on backbench speeches of 3 minutes. Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In view of the time, I want to focus what I say on the second part of Amendment 3G, subclause 8. And I think it is clear that Lord Hope has drawn attention to a flaw in the bill's logic. We all understand it's about parliamentary sovereignty, but if declaring Rwanda safe in the first instance is a matter for Parliament, then why is determining whether it remains safe not also a matter for Parliament? And yet this bill covers only the first determination of safety and provides no mechanism for Parliament to change its mind if circumstances change, save for primary legislation, which of course it would need government to introduce. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, my quarrel with the noble Lord Hope's amendments has been that whereas the theme of this bill is parliamentary authority, the earlier forms of his amendments give effective authority on the safety of Rwanda to the monitoring committee, because their conclusion on treaty compliance would be determinative of the question of safety. But the later versions of his amendments have transferred authority to ministers to determine, on the advice presumably of the monitoring committee, that Rwanda is no longer safe and make a statement to that effect. And I have to say, I think that is not perfect either. I still think that for the bill to have inherent and logical consistency, it should be Parliament's decision on whether Rwanda remains safe in changed circumstances, not a monitoring committee's and not a minister's. But how much latitude Parliament would have in deciding whether Rwanda remains safe in changes of circumstances rather depends on the point I raised in intervention with my right honourable and learned friend. If adherence to the treaty is evidence contributing to an assessment of whether Rwanda remains safe, but is not wholly determinative of the question of safety, then it remains possible, if unlikely, that Parliament would consider non-compliance, but nonetheless decide that Rwanda remains safe for the purposes of the bill. But if its only consideration on safety is the question of compliance with the treaty, then Rwanda cannot remain safe if it is in breach of the treaty. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to be clear which of the two it is. But either way, determinative or not, if Parliament is to be the sovereign decision maker, it must know of non-adherence to the treaty. And directly or indirectly, the Monitoring Committee is the body which can tell us. So it seems to me we must look at Amendment 3G in the light of the late stage in proceedings we are at. We cannot keep batting this bill backwards and forwards across the building. And as I've said, I do not think this amendment is the best way to solve the problem, that Parliament has no mechanism available to it to change its mind if the facts change. But I have to say, with all due respect to the Minister for whom I have high regard, the government hasn't come up with a better alternative. In those circumstances, he leaves me little place to go other than to support this amendment if my right honourable friend can't propose a better way of resolving this deficiency.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the Minister opened by saying that he had looked forward last week to not debating this bill. Well, I wish indeed that the bill had never been brought to this House in the first place and that we wouldn't have to debate this bill. I wish that it had never seen the light of day. And if he never wanted to debate it again, he could have, of course, accepted the Lord's amendments last week instead of stringing this out for even longer, because these are perfectly legitimate amendments that the Lords have brought. But I see that the members on the benches opposite are seeking to get around the tedium of voting on amendments to render vulnerable people overseas. There's a text message circulating on X in the name of the Government Chief Whip saying, "Dear colleagues, with a potentially long and historic night ahead on behalf of the Prime Minister, I would like you to invite you to drinks this evening from 9:30. These will take place in the Prime Minister's office in the House of Commons. I look forward to seeing you there." How absolutely heartless and despicable that the members in the opposite benches are quaffing drinks while they're thinking about sending people to Rwanda. How utterly without any kind of moral background whatsoever. And should the Lords send back further amendments tonight, should they carry out the procedural, unusual procedural matter of double insistence, I would certainly support them very much in that endeavour. Any mechanism that we can use in this place to stop this bill is what we should do. I will.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate her on using every procedure that is available to her to state the SNP's opposition, not least, Madam Deputy Speaker, by moving amendments in the Reasons Committee last week, because we in the SNP will take every single opportunity to express our opposition to this outrageous plan.
I thank him for his intervention and would note on the record that Labour did not vote on any of the reasons that I sought to amend in the Reasons Committee, and I've yet to have any explanation as to why they wouldn't use any mechanism available to them to oppose this bill. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we had yet another press conference this afternoon where the Prime Minister didn't come to this House to talk about his gurning and his greeting that those mean old Lords wouldn't let him have his way. And I would point out that the Conservatives have over 100 more Lords than Labour, and perhaps the lack of enthusiasm from their own Lords is reflective of the fact that many of them didn't even show up to vote last week. Because this is not in the Conservative Party manifesto. They have no mandate for the Rwanda plan whatsoever. And indeed, what manifesto would they put in front of people which would say we're going to set out to breach our international commitments and engage in state-sponsored people trafficking? What manifesto indeed would that be? And just to mention very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the things that the Prime Minister mentioned in his statement, suddenly conjuring up a whole load of judges to determine these cases, when they could be better served, perhaps, looking at the appeals backlog that his incompetent bulk processing of asylum claims has created. He mentioned charter flights being booked. Well, many commercial companies had refused to be involved in the charter flights at all, including the Rwandan state carrier. So which companies have been engaged to do this, and at which cost? We still don't know. He said that the first flight will leave in 10 to 12 weeks. Will this be before or after we reach summer recess? Because we know already how far the timescale has slipped for the government on this, and what scrutiny will occur should these flights take off during recess. Madam Deputy Speaker, if they do indeed manage to send anybody to Rwanda, where are they going to put them? Because we know that the Rwandans have sold off the housing that they set up to place people in. Will they be piling them up in tents? I wouldn't put it past this government, but it would be useful to know. Moving to the Lord's amendments themselves, Madam Deputy Speaker, we fully support these Lord's amendments, which do their very best to mitigate an absolutely dreadful piece of legislation. And I cannot see what the government's objection really ought to be in Amendment 3G. They were all about taking back control, but yet there were absolutely no parliamentary scrutiny whatsoever of whether Rwanda remains a safe country. And the honourable member from Kenilworth and Southam quite rightly pointed out, we have no means in this place of declaring Rwanda unsafe. We say it's safe for in perpetuity, forever and ever and ever. We can't declare it unsafe should something happen. That is just not logical. And I would note also that the Irish High Court ruled last month that the UK, in fact, is not a safe country to send asylum seekers to in light of these plans. I fully support also the new Amendment 10F from the Lords regarding Afghans. And I've mentioned it many times before, my support for those Afghans who served and supported UK objectives in Afghanistan, and how woeful the government's response to the need of those people has been. And I would point... I will briefly, yes.
I'm grateful to her for giving way. Would she agree with me that rather than spending £11,000 per person to deport them to Rwanda, that money could be used right now to rescue my constituent and his wife, who got out of Afghanistan into Pakistan and are now stuck there waiting for the UK government to rescue them?
I wholeheartedly agree, and I know of many such cases of people who have been sorely let down by this government. And we note that the figures that the government brought out this morning, that there has been an increase in small boat arrivals this past 3 months compared to last year. So it's hardly any kind of deterrent if people are still coming over in small boats in their droves. But I would note amongst them were 1,216 Afghans, an increase on the 1,098 that came in the same period last year. If he thinks the Afghan schemes are such a roaring success, why are so many Afghans being forced onto small boats just to get to safety? Many of them will have family in this country. Many of them will not have been able to avail themselves of the Afghan schemes he so talks up. And many of them will not have been able to use family reunion, which is an existing safe and legal route which many people are not able to access. Madam Deputy Speaker, in light of time, I will not go further into the detail of some of the Afghan cases I wished to raise. But I will say this to this government. This legislation is utterly despicable. It is state-sponsored people trafficking. It is against our obligations in international law, and Scotland wants no part of it. We will oppose it every step of the way.
Tim Lawson. Speaker, can I start by agreeing with the opposition spokesman when he said that there's nothing new to say. The trouble is that he then spent 14 minutes saying nothing new. And to say that these amendments do nothing to stop flights getting off the ground. The fact that we are still having to debate amendments is preventing the legislation going through which would allow the scheme literally to get off the ground. So now it's time to get the Rwanda legislation done. The remaining amendments, many people have had days, weeks and months to make their points. The government have given undertakings. We've heard further undertakings about the treatment of Afghan refugees here today. This bill does not oblige the government to return anybody from Afghan. There are explicit schemes particularly to protect them. And in terms of declaring Rwanda a safe country, the only reason the legislation has stated such is because a court declared it not to be based on limited and snapshot evidence. The government has a white list of countries which are not deemed to be safe. The FCDO issues guidance about where it's safe to travel. But what does constitute safe in the eyes of those courts? Is Spain safe if you're a Catalonian dissident who is in exile because they've taken issue with the Spanish government? Is it safe to go back to France? Some of the refugees I've met in the Napier barracks claim that they are beaten by French police and it's not safe for them to go back to France. Indeed, is London safe if you are openly Jewish in the eyes of some court judgments? There are plenty of safeguards that are given in this bill. It will bring people back to the UK if it's deemed not to be safe or appropriate. There's plenty of international legal scrutiny now added into this bill. The issue of refoulement, which was the major complaint about by the Supreme Court, has been dealt with. Legal assistance is available for those sent to Rwanda. And we know, and I'll say it again, when the Home Affairs Select Committee went to Calais last year, we were told by all of those in charge of the policing system on the beaches that when the government announced the Rwanda scheme in the previous May, there was a surge in migrants around Calais approaching the French authorities to try and regularise their position in France because they did not want to risk being sent to Rwanda. What is disgraceful, Madam Deputy Speaker, is time and time again, those behind these amendments, the Labour Party continuing this ping-pong, have not come up with a single solution to the really important question of what do you do with asylum seekers who have come to this country illegally, who have no credible case to be in the UK, but for whom it is practically impossible to return them to this country. And what's also absolutely disgraceful is just this morning the Shadow Home Secretary has made it quite clear that a Labour government would abolish the Rwanda scheme, whether it's working or not. What they are saying to people the other side of the channel, just wait a few months, then you can come in your droves as much as you like. That is the truth of the matter. These amendments need to be beaten again.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Deputy Speaker, and whilst I agree with quite a lot of what the honourable gentleman says at times, that point that the honourable gentleman just made about Labour's policy is absolutely incorrect. Can I just say that I'm very pleased that the Minister has stated at the beginning of his remarks that the other place has absolutely the right to act as a revising chamber and to give their advice to this chamber. Lord's Amendment 3G is tabled by the Noble Lord Hope of Craighead, as we know, a former Deputy President of the Supreme Court, and it states that Rwanda cannot be considered a safe country for the purposes of the Act until the Secretary of State has obtained and laid before Parliament a statement from the Independent Monitoring Committee confirming the treaty provisions have been implemented. And it also allows for the Secretary of State to rescind the confirmation if the treaty stops being adhered to, rather than the nonsense position of claiming that Rwanda is safe forevermore. This is a sensible and measured amendment to deal with the facts and for allowing them to, when they change. And on the day that the Prime Minister has stated that some asylum decision makers and judges have been trained, the Joint Monitoring Committee set up and the President of the new appeal body selected, we still don't know whether all the other provisions of the treaty have been fully implemented or whether the number of officials in place is sufficient. So with the Prime Minister insisting that flights will begin in 10 to 12 weeks, Lord's Amendment 3G provides a vital safeguard ensuring everyone sent to Rwanda will be protected by the implementation of the treaty provisions. And I think this is entirely reasonable, and I agree with what the Right Honourable Member for Kenworth and Southam said. Just turning to Lord's Amendment 10F, tabled by the Noble Lord Brown of Ladyton, a former Secretary of State for Defence, it provides the exemption for people who supported the armed forces overseas or who have otherwise been agents or allies of the UK overseas. Anyone seeking to rely on the exemption would need to provide notice to the Secretary of State within 1 week of arrival in the UK. Now, ministers have sought to reassure members that they were reviewing the position and that they would consider and revisit how the Illegal Migration Act and removal under existing immigration legislation will apply to those who are determined ARAP eligible. But I must note that responding in the House of Lords, the Noble Lord Brown dubbed this assurance as worthless.
And we should all be conscious of the strength of feeling amongst those former senior armed forces personnel who support this amendment. When individuals risk their lives to support British troops overseas, we must honour our commitment to providing sanctuary, not outsource it. And that is why I'm going to support the Lord's amendment.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm mindful of time, as always. It's quite rightly being reduced as we deal with this bill rather similar to some sort of exotic recipe where the sauce is reduced and reduced on every occasion. We're now down to 2 important amendments, and I'm glad that in his tone and in his approach to this, my right honourable learned friend on the dispatch box has absolutely embraced this debate as he should, which is all about the detail, getting it right. He knows that I support this policy. We've heard a lot of rhetoric again in this chamber which is unfortunate and misleading. We are doing something genuinely innovative, and it is right that we should do so. However, I do think that the revised Amendment 3G in its form now, particularly in light of the remarks of my right honourable learned friend, the member for Kenilworth and Southern, does actually strike an appropriate balance here, not only in terms of making sure that the reality of the position in Rwanda is met by the deeming provision in law, but that there is a mechanism by which we can deal with this as a parliament if indeed circumstances change. And I think with great respect to my right honourable learned friend, he did almost concede that if there was to be a change in the situation in Rwanda, then primary legislation would have to be at least considered by the government. It seems to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it would be far better to ensure against that, to avoid the need for further primary legislation by making sure that in this bill we can wrap it all up and make sure that we have a system that is not just strong when it comes to potential legal challenge, but which also gives this place, I think, its rightful role. So I do, alongside my right honourable learned friend, still commend and support that particular provision. Now, I noted with regard to Amendment 10F the comments that my right honourable learned friend made from the dispatch box, the assurances that he gave about the status of people who have had an assessment and are found therefore to have satisfied the requirements of the scheme. That's an important step forward. I don't take the view that we should regard these matters as worthless. I do regard it as having quite a lot of weight, and I'm grateful to him for that. I do think that making that very clear on the face of the bill would probably clear the matter up once and for all, and it may well mean, not that I mind being here till the wee small hours of the morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, but it may well mean that we can clear up this business once and for all. And I'm in the market for sorting this out now, so this bill can become law before it is too late this evening. That's why I would commend perhaps a little further movement on 10F by my right honourable friend.
Sammy Wilson.
Throughout this bill, my party, both here and in the other place, has given, by and large, support to the government, even though at times we've been sceptical and we have been concerned about how effective some of the measures are. But I've got to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, we draw the line when it comes to the Lord's Amendment 10F and the protection of people who have served with our armed forces in dangerous situations and now find their lives being put in jeopardy. And this amendment, I don't believe, the Minister has made the point time and time again that some of these amendments are wrecking amendments or attempts to create loopholes, etc. Let's look at the amendment. People who will be covered by this amendment, first of all, will have served this country. Secondly, as a result of that, their lives will be in danger. Thirdly, when they arrive in this country, they have within a week to immediately inform the authorities that they're here. And then that allows for their records to be looked at, for their claims to be verified, and for their connections with the armed forces to be ascertained. And lastly, if they haven't done that, then in any subsequent cases the courts can draw inference from it. So nothing can be more watertight than this particular amendment. And yet the government is refusing to accept it on the basis, well, there's already arrangements in place. Well, why is it, and my colleague from Strangford has raised time and time again in this House, and as of others, why is it that there are people who serve the armed forces in Afghanistan who find themselves in danger at present? They're on the run from the police in Pakistan. They're hiding because the police in Pakistan want to send them back to Afghanistan where they'll be in danger. Why? Because the system has not worked for them. And that's why I think it is important that this amendment is accepted. We have a moral duty. And as has been pointed out, if we're going to look to the future and recruit people in trouble spots to help the armed forces, then we have got a strategic duty. And I believe that if the Minister really wants to get this stuff through tonight, he's got a political reason for doing this. Because at least by accepting this amendment, he takes away another leg that the other House is seeking to stand on when it comes to opposing this bill. And for all of those reasons, I hope that the Minister will accept this amendment to protect those who have served us, to get this bill through, and to avoid any further delay.
John MacDonald.
Just to follow on from the member for East Antrim, we get to this stage I think this is a disgraceful bill. I want to oppose it at every opportunity, but you have to accept at some stage the bill will go through, and therefore it's the normal run of things in these matters that the government will compromise on a number of issues, and usually by this time. And for the life of me, I can't understand why we haven't reached that compromise so far, particularly on this particular amendment. I just want to make this particular point. It's exactly as the member for East Antrim said, if the system was working it was at the moment, we wouldn't be finding the cases that we've got. I think the situation in Afghanistan in particular is deteriorating at the moment. I just give one example of a case I'm dealing with. There's a woman who is in this country now who campaigned for women's rights in Afghanistan. The Taliban are now arresting and torturing her family. And that's just because she stood up for women's rights. If you're any way associated with the British government in any form, it makes matters even worse. I had another constituent in one of the hotels, an asylum seeker in one of the hotels, whose family simply rented out property to the BBC and some of the British authorities as well. The family got out, but they actually still had their connection with their video. And they showed me the videos of the Taliban turning up and beating up almost to pulp the staff of that family who were working in those premises then. The situation is deteriorating. The existing system is not working. People who are in any way associated with the British government and the British forces in particular are targeted, and their family are targeted, and they're not just abused, they're actually tortured. I just think we have a debt of honour, and the compromise has to be done tonight. This amendment cannot be seen as a wrecking amendment in any way. It's simply a logical conclusion of the debate that we've had in both our houses. And I urge the other place to stand firm on this one, because I actually do think the British public support this amendment as well as this. But I actually do think maybe a majority in this House really want to support it too. So I urge the government to think again, because this has gone beyond the normal process. My honourable friend from the front bench said, what is there to gain from the government in continuing this process overall? If they think this is about demonstrating their own bravado, their commitment, trying to get some publicity out of this, I actually think it's going the other way. I think at the moment the general political mood and public mood is, for goodness sake, except when there's a compromise offered, you should seize it, particularly on this particular issue.
Tim Farron.
Deputy Speaker, I hear from the other side impatience and irritation that we're still here, still debating this. I would respectfully just point to them the impatience, irritation, even outrage on the part of my constituents at the fact that this government is wasting vast amounts of their money on something they know, and the government knows, will not work. That there's a 1 in 200 chance that an asylum seeker might be sent to Rwanda is clearly not going to be a disincentive. What could be a deterrent would be to process the applications that we have and remove that 25% of asylum seekers who turn out not to be genuine. You will never know that if you don't have the competence to process it. What also would be sensible is to actually set out safe routes so you are able to bypass and therefore undermine the model of the evil people traffickers. That outrage from my constituents also goes to the knowledge that what could be done with the money that has been spent on this nonsense scheme so far. It's the equivalent, Madam Deputy Speaker, of 5.7 million GP appointments if the government had the priorities that the British people want them to have. These two amendments are entirely sensible. I don't need to repeat all the arguments for them, but that we should have independent verification and not simply declare that a place is safe despite the lack of evidence is nonsense. Of course, as an aside, if Rwanda is a safe place, then why would it be a deterrent? And if it's not a safe place, why would any decent government send anybody there? But I support the Lords in pushing 3G with 10F. I'm not going to give way because we're about to finish. It's unfair on others. 10F guarantees that those who've risked everything to protect and serve our men and women in Afghanistan, our servicemen and women, to not be betrayed by this or future government is a basically simple and decent thing to ask for. And whatever the motivations the government ascribes to those moving this amendment, it's clearly a totally reasonable one, and a reasonable government would accept it. But going back to finish the government's, to address the government's irritation, the Conservative Party's irritation that we are still here, I want to just gently encourage Conservative members here present, right honourable and honourable members, to imagine a time, sometime in the future maybe, when they are not in government and they are in opposition. Let's imagine a time when a government of a different colour ignores the rule of law, bypasses the courts, thinks itself above the law, and then tries to use its numbers in Parliament to steamroller through something that was not in their manifesto and for which they have no mandate. An honest answer to that question would lead to this government yield. This is awful legislation, it is cruel, it is inept, it is expensive. We should vote the amendments through, the Lords should keep going, the government should concede.
Minister Michael Tomlinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with leave of the House, may I address very directly my right honourable and learned friend, the member for Kenilworth and Southam, and my right honourable and learned friend, the member for South Swindon, because they have both addressed Amendment 3G. This amendment does not do what my right honourable and learned friends are looking for. They are looking for a parliamentary moment. This amendment merely produces a statement. And I would invite them to imagine a scenario whereby what we have been discussing would not produce a statement in any event, would not produce an urgent question, would not produce a moment for a Secretary of State to have a statement in the chamber of the House of Commons in any event. And I repeat to my right honourable learned friend, this amendment does not meet the challenge that he has set, and I would encourage him to be with the government in a few short minutes' time. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must get on and put an end to this. We must pass this legislation and to stop the boats. Perhaps in the words of my honourable friend, the member for Stone, I urge this House once again to send a clear and unambiguous message to the other place, and I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3G. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3G. As mayors that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tellers for the ayes, Joy Morrissey and Mark Jenkinson. Tellers for the noes, Tonya Antoniazzi and Mary Glindon.
The ayes to the right were 306. The noes to the left were 229.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 229. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Under March, I must now put the question necessary to bring to a conclusion proceedings on the Lord's messages. Minister, to move the motion to disagree formally.
I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 10F. As mayors that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 10F. As mayors that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Joy Morrissey and Mark Jenkinson. Tellers for the noes, Tonya Antoniazzi and Mary Glindon. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 305. The noes to the left, 234.
The ayes to the right, 305. The noes to the left, 234. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Minister to move that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons.
I beg to move that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments. That Michael Tomlinson, Scott Mann, Kieran Mullen, James Sunderland, Stephen Kinnock, Colleen Fletcher and Alison Poulis be members of the committee. That Michael Tomlinson be the chair of the committee. That 3 be the quorum of the committee. That the committee do withdraw immediately.
The question is be appointed to draw up reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments 3G and 10F. That Michael Tomlinson, Scott Mann, Kieran Mullen, James Sunderland, Stephen Kinnock, Colleen Fletcher and Alison Poulis be members of the committee. That Michael Tomlinson be the chair of the committee. That 3 be the quorum of the committee. That the committee do withdraw immediately. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Such enthusiasm. Of the contrary, no. Clear the lobby. The question is that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments 3G and 10F. The remainder of the motion I have already put to the House. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes. I've got it. And I can't take it on the voices. The no voices are pretty loud. Tell us for the ayes, Joy Morrissey and Mark Jenkinson. Tell us for the noes, Peter Grant and Stephen Bonner. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right were 309. The noes to the left were 37.
The ayes to the right, 309. The noes to the left, 37. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. That concludes consideration of the Lord's message of 18th April relating to the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill. Just for clarity, I should say that the result of that division means that the House has decided that the Reasons Committee should be appointed. And I would normally say at that point that the committee do withdraw immediately. Oh, they've probably already gone. Yeah. The House may be called a further Lord's message later today, if necessary. And so we come to motion number 2 relating to business of the House today. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As may is that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And we come now to motion number on the Digital Competition and Consumers Bill carryover extension. I call the Minister to move the motion. The question is the motion on the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Bill as on the order paper. As Mayor is that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. And so we come to motion number 4 on the Renters Reform Bill carryover extension. I call the Minister to move the motion formally.
Formally.
The question is the motion on the Renters Reform Bill as on the order papers. May I have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. So we come to motion number 5 on the Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill carryover extension. I call the Minister to move the motion formally.
Formally.
The question is the motion on the Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill as on the order papers. May that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division, clear the lobby. Order! The question is the motion on the Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill as on the order paper. As Mayor is that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us with the ayes Joy Morrissey and Mark Jenkinson. Tell us with the noes Peter Grant and Stephen Bonner. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 304. The noes to the left, 222.
The ayes to the right, 304. The noes to the left, 222. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to the money resolution in respect of the pensions special rules for end of life bill. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And we come to the money resolution in respect of the International Freedom of Religion or Belief Bill. Minister to move. Mr. Jim Challen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want to ask a question and make a comment if I can. First of all, declare an interest, Madam Deputy Speaker, as Chair of the APPG for Freedom of Religious Belief. The reason why I do this is to ensure that the monies and the staffing that is necessary is in place. So I heartily welcome the decision for this House to appoint a special envoy for freedom of religion and belief, and the passing of this bill, hopefully in the money resolution, to ensure that the envoy has the staff and the support necessary for this position to not simply be a token gesture, but one that is effective in securing freedom of religion and belief. Not simply in our nation, because we speak in this House on these issues not just for our nation but for across this world as well, and those who secure the right to hold and practice a Christian belief, those with other belief and those with no belief. So can the Minister confirm that this is undoubtedly money well spent for international obligations, and that it will ensure that the Secretariat will be sufficient in staff and monies to ensure that this gigantic task which we have before us tonight, and which I welcome from government, can actually be sufficiently assured of the monies that are needed to deliver this action? Thank you so much.
Minister.
Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend raises some very important points, but he will know, having seen the bill through so many stages, that all the resources are in place, and the committee is sitting on Wednesday, and I'll be taking the bill forward. Absolute commitment to the role, absolute commitment to provide the support services to enable the role to continue for as long as it can. I believe with the language is used, we are establishing this role permanently and in perpetuity, and it's a recommendation on the back of Bishop Truro's 2019 independent review into the work of the FCDO and the Freedom of Religion brief, and the implementation is also a manifesto commitment to absolute assurances that the support will be provided. And back to me, Vice Chair. Yes.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, as mayors that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Ayes have it. The ayes have it. And so we proceed to the backbench business. The backbench business debate is on hospice funding. I call Sally Ann Hart to move the motion.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that this House consider the postcode lottery when it comes to funding for hospices, and calls on integrated care boards to urgently address the funding for hospice provided palliative care in their areas. As a member of the APPG for Hospice and End-of-Life Care, I'm very happy to be co-leading this debate with my lovely friend, the Honourable Member for Darlington, who applied for and moved this motion for debate today. I have so much admiration for hospice and palliative care providers and empathy for those experiencing dying, death and bereavement. Both my parents died of cancer, and I will always be grateful for the amazing care that they received. Hospice care is important to so many people, and we're very lucky to have St Michael's Hospice in beautiful Hastings and Rye, and Demelza House, which offers palliative care for children largely through outreach work. When the Honourable Member I can't remember, was for Bromwich, Bromsgrove was Health Secretary. He announced the legal right to palliative care for all ages. And this was an amendment to the Health and Care Act which declared for the first time a duty for integrated care boards in England to commission palliative and end-of-life care that meets the needs and the demographic of the population it serves. I could not believe that end-of-life care was not already a legal right. We should all want to see the best support available for those people that are nearing the end of their lives as well as their families. And excellent palliative care, support for people mentally, physically and spiritually is vital. But the future, I will give way on that point.
I agree with everything that she said. I wanted to highlight the importance of palliative care for children and the amazing support that some children's hospices are able to provide, not just for the child, but actually for the entire family. It really is wraparound care and so important for those parents going through that bereavement process.
Thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I couldn't agree more with him. He's absolutely right.
My honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, because she raises the point about why isn't it funded. In Southend we have the absolutely brilliant Havens Hospice, including a child's hospice, Little Havens. Over 80% of their funding comes from donations, so it's dependent on skydives and cycle rides, which is fantastic. But given we fund on the NHS the beginning of life with maternity care, doesn't she think we should be funding the end of life?
I do indeed think that that is the case, and I will be coming to that a little bit later on. The future of end-of-life care is uncertain as increasing costs and demands are putting huge pressures on hospices and care providers. And when it comes to the debate on assisted suicide, it's important that people feel confident that their end-of-life care will protect them from pain and suffering. Certainly we need increased funding. More resources are needed for end-of-life care services, including hospices, home care and palliative care teams. St Michael's Hospice, for example, costs around £7 million a year to run, and they receive about £2 million from the RICB, and the remaining £5 comes from the community in various forms. And like all hospices, St Michael's is heavily dependent on the generosity of local individuals, companies, groups and trusts. This funding model is uncertain and unsustainable and places hospices under considerable strain. I will give way.
The Honourable Lady for giving way, and I congratulate her on this important debate. On the Honourable Member for Brent's point about children's hospices, I have the fantastic Shooting Star Children's Hospice in Hampton in my constituency, which serves a wide catchment area. And although she mentioned the statutory duty that was introduced by the government on ICBs to commission and fund palliative care, the problem is there's such huge variability. Surrey Heartlands, which is one of the ICBs that Shooting Star serves, only spends a paltry £39 per child, even though the average should be about 151, and other ICBs won't even disclose the amount. So does she agree with me that we need multi-year contracts with ICBs to serve these hospices?
Very good point. Yeah.
Yes, I would praise my honourable friend for her intervention, and yes, I would agree with that, and coming to that later in my speech here. So, Demelza receives just 10% of its income from the Children's Hospice Grant, which ends in March 2025, and just 4% of their income from spot purchases, so 86% of their income must come from fundraising. I'm concerned that neither the UK Government nor NHS England have set out whether the Children's Hospice Grant, which is worth £25 million, will continue beyond 2024 to 25, and the grant is a vital source of funding for children's hospices. Dependence on the generosity of members of the public to pay for vital healthcare is not something that would be tolerated in other core areas of healthcare, such as maternity services, cancer care or A&E. Hospices are the only statutory service that rely on fundraising to keep going, despite end-of-life care being an essential service that so many of us will need.
Will she allow
This
me?
is made...
Will she allow me?
Yes.
What makes hospices so remarkable is their independence. And my fear is that the more one demands that they be funded by the state, that independence will be curtailed and questioned. And I think it's the member for Teddington who has put her finger on what I think is the difficulty, and that is the difference between the policies of different ICBs. And that's where the problem is. And were they funded centrally for the grants that are available, I think it would be much better, as they were during the pandemic.
Well, I would quite agree with my honourable friend. I think it's really important to point out that most hospices don't want 100% funding from the government because they need the flexibility to be able to do what they want. And fundraising is a really important part of the local community effort, bringing people together to help fundraising. But when the dependence on fundraising is so vast, that is where we might need to intervene to provide that extra funding. So, pressures of... Can you just give me one moment and I'll give way? So, end-of-life care is an essential service so many of us will need, but it's made worse by inflationary pressures and rising demand. We have an excellent ICB in Sussex, NHS Sussex, led by Adam Doyle, which has highlighted that hospices are recognised as having become increasingly fragile in recent years due to a lack of resilience in their funding model, which is heavily reliant on given and gifted income alongside NHS grants. I will give way.
On that point, Royal Trinity Hospice in my constituency supports people across central and southwest London to live and die well every single year. Next year it's going to cost them 90 million to deliver care for around the 2,500 patients and support the nearly 1,000 loved ones that they do. A 20% on-year increase. Meanwhile, the NHS funding they receive will decrease in real terms to 24% of the costs of running their services. So does the Honourable Member agree that the government should commit to maintaining the funding levels that hospices like Royal Trinity require to ensure that people receive the quality of end-of-life care and the dignified deaths that they deserve?
The honourable member for her intervention, and this is the point of the debate, to work out what sort of funding models we do need, but also ICBs need to be able to assess their priorities that they have in their local areas. They're given the freedom to do so, but I do take that on board. We have 8 hospices. Can I just carry on for a minute? We have 8 hospices across Sussex, and in 2019, 7 of them formed the Sussex Hospice Collaborative partnership, working to help ensure the hospices' combined resources can be used to maximise their impact, reach and cost effectiveness of their activities. NHS Sussex works closely with this collaborative arrangement, which has supported the ability to have collective conversations. In January, the APPG on hospice and end-of-life care published a report on government funding for hospices. The inquiry found that despite the introduction of a legal requirement for integrated care boards to commission palliative and end-of-life care, ICB commissioning of hospice services is currently not fit for purpose, and the value they provide to individuals and the wider health system is at risk. Hospice funding has historically not risen in line with inflation, which has been brought starkly to light during the periods of high inflation in recent years. Costs to keep palliative services running have increased rapidly over the past few years, but this is not reflected in the government funding hospices receive to deliver these services, which has increased by only 1% each year on average. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
And making an outstanding speech, and I congratulate her for bringing this to the House. St Mary's Hospice, St John's Hospice and Eden Valley Hospice, which serve the communities of Westmoreland, struggle like others from finding the funding they need to keep going. Of course, one of their issues is increased pay settlements in the NHS, which are good, but to compete and to get the staff and retain the staff within those hospices means that the hospices need to raise their pay to keep pace. Would she agree with me that one model may well be that rather than devolving it to the ICBs, who are not elected, not accountable directly to anybody, but the government through the National Health Service should fund at NHS pay rates, pay rises directly to all our hospices, so they're not worrying at least about that?
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman raises a valuable point, and I'm sure that is a point that the Minister will take on board. I will give way.
A, for her excellent speech, and B, because this is a really important debate. And I think she comes to the crux of the matter. And is she aware that I would really be interested to hear from the Minister, because our Mountbatten Hospice in Newport and the Isle of Wight, it's much loved, one of the core institutions on the island, their inflation costs in the last 2 years have been way above what they have been getting from the ICB. And our ICB is in special measures. We had 2 meetings with the ICB last week, very unclear about some of their long-term plans and how they're using the funding they have. And would she agree that really we need to make sure our ICBs are properly managed, properly run? I'm delighted she's got a great ICB. Us, it's a little bit more complicated, but we need to make sure that funding is going through to the hospices. So when there is the state element of funding, and one can debate about the very important nature of fundraising, actually the NHS money is getting through, because right now it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah.
And I absolutely feel it's unfortunate that your ICB is not brilliant or very good at all.
It's dreadful.
And
his ICB.
His ICB, yes, is not very good. Obviously, leadership, structure and a clear list of priorities is absolutely essential in order to deliver what the public needs. So, this significant funding challenges are particularly concerning in the context of increasing needs. Sue Ryder, a palliative and bereavement support charity, projects that demand for specialist palliative care service in England may rise by 55% from over the current decade, and this rise in demand is due to several factors, including increased mortality rates and a growing desire by patients to die at home rather than in hospital. It's clear we need a commitment from government to fund a much higher percentage of total palliative care costs than is currently done to ensure the sustainability of the hospice sector and the vital services that hospices provide in the medium term. ICBs cannot commission specialist services without the funding to do so. The APPG's report made a number of recommendations to government, the NHS and local authorities. On funding, the APPG recommended the government should produce a national plan to ensure the right funding flows to hospices and conduct or commission a piece of work to understand the costs of providing different models of palliative care and end-of-life care. And it also called for government funding to address immediate pressures of paying increased staffing costs for hospices, and said ICBs must ensure uplifts to hospice contracts which are equitable with uplifts received by NHS-run services. I will give way.
Thank the Honourable Lady for Hastings and Rye for giving way. We have a hospice care centre in Belfast. It gives excellent work to those who in the Marie Curie who have cancer. But does the Honourable Lady agree as well? Well, it's very important to have the financial part in place, and without it can't go on. But it's also important to have the faith aspect of it as well, because many people who have to visit the hospice care are on their last journey. Ever mindful that the last journey is not in this world, but the next world is the one that matters. So I'm just asking the Honourable Lady, when it comes to ensuring that monies are available, does she also agree that faith is so important as well? And that faith care that Marie Curie hospice care given Belfast is an example of what we all need. Whatever your faith may be, Christianity or other religious aspects, it's really important to have something that looks after the hereafter.
And thank you, my honourable friend, for his intervention. And faith is very, very important for so many people. But also, if you don't have a faith, there is a spiritual aspect that needs to be looked after as well. So I know my honourable friend for Darlington will cover the report in more detail. Hospices need to be able to plan and invest in their services and develop and train specialist staff, so they need to know in advance how much funding they're getting. Hospices face training and recruitment issues, so worrying about being able to even provide an adequate service due to funding restraints should not be another one. My goddaughter is a young doctor who wants to specialise in palliative care, which is really remarkable for a young person, but we do need more young people. We need more medics, nurses and occupational therapists and so on in this growing area. And at least a 3-year funding cycle is required, as it would allow hospices and palliative care providers to plan accordingly. Finally, I'd like to conclude with a worrying Hospice UK statistic. They estimate that the end-of-life care sector is on track for a 77 million collective deficit for the financial year 23-24. This would represent the worst end-of-year figures for the sector in around 20 years of tracking. These losses are not sustainable, and our right to end-of-life care is now at risk unless immediate action is taken. Our hospices, palliative care and end-of-life services need to be properly funded. And could the Minister outline what steps she is taking to ensure that this happens? Thank you.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper. Bambos Charalambo.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I wish to thank the honourable members for Hastings and Ryan Darlington for securing this very important debate today. Hospices do incredible work. In communities across the country, hospices provide care to hundreds of thousands of people every year, providing essential palliative and end-of-life care. The service that hospices deliver are absolutely crucial to improving the quality of life for people in their final weeks and days, helping to provide a dignified, comfortable and compassionate end of life. This support is not just vital to people at the end of their lives, but also to their family and friends. End-of-life care impacts not just the patient, but all their loved ones, and the specialist support hospices provide patients in their final stages of life and their families who are watching them pass away without suffering or pain is immeasurable. And that is why hospices are so important. In my constituency of Enfield Southgate, we're lucky to have a facility of the incredible North London Hospice, which has been caring for people since 1984. Their health and wellbeing centre in Barrywell Green helps to enable the best of life at the end of life for people across the boroughs of Enfield, Haringey and Barnet, providing tailored care, including physical, emotional, spiritual wellbeing and bereavement support for patients, friends, carers and loved ones. And I must also mention the wonderful North London Hospice Photography Club, who also support each other and take amazing pictures which they sell to raise funds for the hospice. I remember hearing from a constituent of mine, Joy Watkins, who was receiving care and support at the hospice. Joy has sadly passed away now, but her words about the importance of the hospice and the care she received were incredibly moving. Joy spoke about going to something called a death cafe, which is an informal space for people to talk about end of life, to share their concerns and listen to others express their thoughts, hopes and experiences of death. She said that going to the Death Cafe enabled her to make choices about the end of her life. She could make choices about who to spend time with and about the finances she would make use of at the end of her life. It transformed the way in which she viewed and handled the end of her life. The way we talk and approach dying matters, and Joy's words have really stuck with me. Indeed, it was one of the reasons that motivated me to introduce my private member's bill back in 2018 on the provision of comprehensive palliative care. And I know that next month Hospice UK will be promoting their campaign for Dying Matters Awareness Week, and I look forward to supporting their efforts on what is a really important initiative. Being honest, timely conversations about death and dying are essential to good end-of-life care. Yet all too often, barriers including lack of confidence, taboos around discussing death and confusion about who should be having these conversations mean patients, carers and families may not understand what is happening or not get all the information and support they need. And that's where hospices and their brilliant staff come in. More recently, a close family member of mine received support from North London Hospice, and although Gabby sadly passed away, I'm so grateful for their specialist care. Mr. Deputy Speaker, yesterday I and about a dozen honourable members ran the London Marathon. And I was proud to do so to raise money for North London Hospice. What was striking when pounding the streets of London in such a wonderful festival of community yesterday was seeing how many runners, like me, were also raising money for their local hospices, and this demonstrates the sad reality of the inadequate central funding for hospices. Since I was first elected, I've been trying to bang the drum for North London Hospice, and although it took me a few years to muster the courage to put on the running vest and put my knees on the line, it does feel like as each year passes, the challenges facing hospices grow greater and more acute. As we know, hospices are an integral part of our health and social care system. They work in partnership with local health and care systems, helping to reduce the pressure on our NHS by caring for patients who would otherwise be directly supported by NHS services. And as a community, we're reliant on hospices, and they are important parts of the community that they serve. But hospices are also reliant on us for support too, through fundraising and donations, as they are largely charitably funded. On average, around 2/3 of adult hospices' income is raised through fundraising, such as charity shops and marathons. The figure is higher for children's hospices, which must raise around 4/5 of their income. I give way to the Honourable Member.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. On children's hospices, the shooting star in my constituency, which I've already mentioned, is very grateful that the Minister who's sitting on the bench at the moment has indeed committed for 2024-2025 the children's hospice grant that does come centrally from NHS England. The problem is that's a sort of year-to-year commitment which really doesn't help hospices like Shooting Star to be able to plan for the long term. So does he agree with me that there should be a ring fence placed around that funding and it should be pegged to inflation year on year so that children's hospices can plan properly?
The Honourable Member makes an excellent point. Long-term funding is absolutely essential for hospices, particularly children's hospices, to be able to project into the future what they need to do and how to plan ahead. So she makes an excellent point there. So I know, for example, that North London Hospice are reliant on donations from the community each year to fill their 10 million funding gap, as only a small proportion of their costs are funded by the NHS. Of course, the cost of living crisis continues to eat away at people's finances, and this directly impacts on our community's ability to provide the vital charitable support that hospices rely on. With the current state of hospice funding, the reality is that hospices are struggling to keep up with inflation and rising costs, and this is leading to services being cut. But demand for palliative care continues to grow. For North London Hospice, it has grown at a rate of 5% year on year. Costs of running hospice services also continue to rise rapidly, for example with energy bills and the cost of paying staff a fair wage. Hospices recruit from the small pool of staff as the NHS and care sector. However, they're not provided with the same government funding to meet NHS pay levels, and this means that many hospice staff are doing the same jobs as their NHS colleagues but being paid less for it. As a result, Hospice UK's figures suggest an 11% growth in payroll costs this year, which means around 130 million of additional spending, which is not met by increased statutory funding. As mentioned, these costs are not met with additional uplifts from NHS funding or contracts, and despite a legal requirement for integrated care boards to commission palliative care services that meet the needs of local population, the funding hospices receive from ICBs varies significantly across the country and means charitable donations make up much of their income. I give way.
Thank you for giving way. As a former hospice fundraiser myself, what I did before I came here, I'm grateful for the Honourable Member to bring the debate. Part of the problem that I saw and I faced firsthand was that with pay rise and inflation, I was going out to private companies, trusts and foundations to increase pay within inflation, often finding that the hardest thing to fundraise for. The ICB was never very forthcoming in doing that, particularly when we would be entering into conversations with the ICB the year prior to the year being funded. So,
my honourable friend makes an excellent point. It's hard enough to fundraise when you're fundraising for inflationary costs. That makes it much, much harder for fundraisers to do an excellent job for all our hospices and actually bring such an enormous amount of money together to make sure the hospices are run sufficiently adequately. Therefore, many hospices like North London Hospice will be continuing to operate a deficit budget for 2024-25, with shortfall being met from reserves. Indeed, Hospice UK estimates that the sector is on track for a 77 million collective deficit for the financial year 2023-24. These are the worst end-of-year figures in around 20 years of tracking. This funding model is simply unsustainable. It will undoubtedly lead to hospices cutting back essential services for patients, and this is becoming increasingly urgent. We need to look at how hospices are funded in this country. The essential support they provide should not just be a voluntary service that is topped up by whatever fundraising is available. This is an integral part of our healthcare system, reliant on charitable donations. No other services are funded in this way, and it's unthinkable, for example, that maternity services will be left up to charities to plug shortfalls. So why is end-of-life care reliant on the kindness of strangers? It is really worrying, and I believe that we need to look at delivering a far more secure long-term model of funding that protects our hospices and partners them with the wider health and care system, because if we do not properly support our hospices, we're in danger of losing them. But I give way to the Honourable Member.
While funding models are different across the UK, I wonder if he agrees with me, because he raised a point I have a bit of a concern with. The vast majority of hospices, like the two in mine, one of which is the largest and oldest in Scotland, St Margaret's of Scotland, the voluntary capacity of the Board of Management has allowed it to develop and, of course, increase its palliative care provision. Does he maybe agree that maybe what we should be looking at is a parity of esteem between the voluntary hospice sector and our differing NHS structures to have that equity of approach and investment?
The Honourable Member makes an excellent point. I think we do need to look at what models work best for each different region. I don't know about the model that he's particularly talking about there, but I think we need to explore, we need to look at the long-term funding of hospices and what models work best for each particular hospice and each particular region. But he makes an excellent point there. I'm pleased that today's debate has shown that the strength of feeling on this issue, and that members have rightly highlighted the need for greater support and funding for hospices in the UK, and that's clear from the excellent speech that the Honourable Member made, as well as the interventions that have been made so far today. And I look forward to hearing from the Minister on the Government's response to the challenges that have been outlined. And finally, I'd like to once again thank everyone at North London Hospice for all their amazing work in my community and beyond, and also thank Hospice UK for all their advocacy on these issues and for their excellent briefings ahead of today's debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Peter Gibson.
Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Enfield Southgate. Great to see him here after his performance yesterday in the London Marathon. I congratulate him on completing that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is a pleasure to be called to speak in this long-awaited debate, and I want to place on the record my thanks and congratulations to my honourable friend from Hastings and Rye for moving the motion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the outset, I want to put on the record my thanks to hospices around the country who have engaged with me in preparing for today's debate. And I want to thank the Hospice UK team, Toby, Katie and Olivia in particular, for their ongoing support to me and to the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Hospices and End-of-Life Care, which I co-chair along with Baroness Finlay of Llandaff. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to draw the House's attention to my register of interests as a trustee of North Yorkshire Hospice Care, which operates both Heriot Hospice Home Care and St Michael's Hospice in Harrogate. I've served as a trustee of this hospice for over a decade and have seen the difficulties that the piecemeal commissioning causes to our precious hospices. To my mind, this debate is not simply about asking the government for more money. We know that there are serious public financial challenges post-pandemic. But this is an opportunity on the floor of the House to discuss solutions for the challenges our hospices face, and I must record my grateful thanks to the Backbench Business Committee for allowing us to have this debate. Seeing the number of members wishing to speak in support of their local hospices today is testament to how much value each and every one of our communities have for their local hospices. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a matter of life and death. The hospice movement is there to deliver good deaths. Now that might seem a strange thing to say, but palliative care delivered in the right environment, be that in a hospice, a children's hospice, or indeed in a person's own home with a hospice at home service, is a truly wonderful thing. Those precious final few weeks of a person's life are imprinted into our memories, and it is right that those who are dying and those who are loving, supporting and caring for them do so in an environment which is properly funded, commissioned, and which is capable of being able to plan and prepare now and into the future for that continuing care.
Would my friend give way?
I'd be happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for his contribution and the previous contributions, both of which have focused to some extent on palliative care and end-of-life care. I have two hospices that serve my constituency, St Andrews in Grimsby and Lindsay Lodge in Scunthorpe, and they provide an excellent end-of-life environment. Would you agree with me that if we are to diffuse the sort of movement towards encouraging assisted dying, we do need to ensure that our hospices provide a service that as an alternative to those who seem to be moving towards assisted dying as an answer?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention. I have my own personal views about assisted dying, and I'm sure in the fullness of time this House will have a debate on that. This debate is not about assisted dying. This is about our hospices and how we fund and support them. And with the greatest of respect to my honourable friend, conflating the two issues is not helpful. Mr Deputy Speaker, even post-death, our wonderful hospice movement provides much needed bereavement care to those who have suffered the loss of a loved one. The Health and Social Care Act 2021 makes provision for the very first time for the commissioning of palliative care. That in itself is a landmark. Integrated care boards around the country now have the responsibility to commission palliative care to meet the needs of the community they serve, which is a good thing, ensuring that local commissioners working together with local providers and local representatives can deliver the palliative care needs of their respective communities. I will happily give way.
Thank you. It's a timely debate. The Select Committee tomorrow morning will have one of its topical sessions on hospice care. Now, I have Naomi House and Jack's Place Hospice in my Winchester constituency, and he said ICBs, plural. The trouble that they have, on top of all of the rising costs and the inflation pressures that are on them at the moment, is that they're negotiating for the same level of grant with 6 ICBs. And I wonder when he comes to summarise the recommendations from his excellent all-party group, whether he would recognise that challenge that many hospices face across multiple commissioning bodies.
I'm very grateful to the Chairman of the Select Committee for his intervention, and I'm grateful for his continuing engagement with me on this really important topic. And he raises a really important issue. And as I will come on to in my speech, this is not just simply about each individual ICB meeting its own challenges. This is something that needs national and the government's attention in order to resolve. Mr Deputy Speaker, what we have seen is a very mixed and patchwork picture across the country. During COVID, the government stepped up to the plate, acted decisively and provided much needed financial support to the hospice movement, which not only prevented many hospices failing and collapsing, but ensured that much needed palliative care continue to be delivered around the country. The picture today, however, is one of immense challenges for our hospices. Many have failed to receive an increased level of support under their existing contracts with ICBs to meet rising costs of energy or staffing. This is at the same time as our hospitals face increased pressure for beds. It is a fact that one night in a hospice costs less than a bed night in a hospital. And whilst there are reasons why a person might need to remain in hospital, better palliative care can be delivered in the more appropriate surroundings of a hospice. Just last week, I met with the Chief Executive of Sue Ryder, Heidi Travis, who also serves as a Commissioner for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough ICB. It was interesting to learn that work is being undertaken to explore ways in which hospices can do more, either with the same level of funding or indeed in some cases less, but in order to explore those creative new ways of delivering hospice care, either through hospice at home models or through virtual wards. Full and frank conversations need to be had between hospices and their integrated care boards to truly explore the art of the possible. Mr Deputy Speaker, in the Tees Valley, I have been pleased to be able to bring together St Teresa's in Darlington, Alice House in Hartlepool, Butterwick Hospice in Stockton and Teesside Hospice in Middlesbrough on multiple occasions, collectively working with all 8 members of Parliament covering the Tees Valley to share a collective voice for the region, so that we can be a beacon of excellence in the provision of palliative care in the North East. Whilst the levels of uplift in funding for these 4 hospices from the North East and North Cumbria Integrated Care Board is simply not enough, the very fact that we are working together, they are working together, and they are meeting with the ICB is a sign of improving relations, and there is hope for the future. I do just wish to touch on the work of our children's hospices, which has already been mentioned by a number of members. They are an integral part of palliative care across the country, and I'm grateful for the engagement that I've had in recent weeks and months with Together for Short Lives. The NHS Children's Hospice grant of £25 million is indeed gratefully received by the sector from government. However, it should be guaranteed for a minimum of 3 years to enable those hospices to be able to be properly plan and commission their services, and it should be uprated in line with inflation each year. Furthermore, it must be ring-fenced so that where that money is passed through regional ICBs, the entirety of that money flows to the front line of those children's hospices. And I would specifically ask the Minister, in her summing up, if she can specifically address that point. Mr Deputy Speaker, in preparing for today's debate, I asked for information and evidence from Hospice UK in respect of hospices in each of the 4 nations of our country. St Michael's, the hospice of which I'm a trustee, is the local hospice care charity supporting people affected by terminal illness and bereavement across Harrogate. Each year, the vital care they provide will cost almost £6 million to deliver, of which just 17% is funded by the government, which equates to a little over £1 million of their total running costs. This leaves over £5 million to be raised through the generosity of their supporters and community. The rise in inflation has brought additional strain on their finances, which has been met with just a 1.2% funding increase from the ICB. Shalom House in Pembrokeshire needs to raise around £288,000 to keep running. This is equal to £24,000 per month. They only receive £5,000 per month from their health board. This amount has been halved in the last 5 years from £10,000. They have not received an uplift for at least the last 4 years. They anticipate that funding ending in September 2024, when the new commissioning model in Wales comes into effect. Without a cash injection, they are in danger of closing within the next 12 months, as their reserves are low. Whilst Shalom House is small, the impact on the community, like all hospices, is huge. In Scotland, Ardergowan in Inverclyde, who, despite a very generous community, are facing a deficit of £100,000. They expect this to rise to £172,000 for the next financial year. In the last 18 months, they have seen utility costs rise by 67% and insurance costs by 10%. They need to see increased support. And in Northern Ireland, Foyle Hospice in Londonderry, 65% of their funding comes purely from fundraising. They are unable to plan ahead or reconfigure services because of the uncertainty over statutory funding, including the outcome of the recent Day Hospice review. They have received some non-recurrent funding through the Cancer Charities Relief Fund, but may be unable to provide these highly valuable services when that funding runs out in March 2025. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are a compassionate and wealthy country. We have a National Health Service which, despite some of its challenges, do incredible things, but so too do our hospices, be they based in buildings or in patients' homes. Our hospices really must be seen as an integral part of our National Health Service. philanthropy and charitable. I will happily give way.
Very grateful. I maybe want to push on the point that I made to the honourable member for Enfield earlier on, because I've heard this notion